Chapter 661, Devouring. In that direction, an extremely tall and sturdy skeleton had actually appeared. In its skull, the blood-red odorous were extremely dense, and there were even bloodstains lingering on the white bones that made up its body. From afar, it looked like its body was covered by a layer of blood-red spider web. Woo-yoo-yoo. The skeleton emitted a shrill woo-yoo-yoo sound, unexpectedly waved its claws and charged into 5 colors heavenly domain's range. However, the pressure from all directions caused it to fall into a quagmire, its speed becoming rather slow. It's actually a peak stage 9 guy. A smile appeared on Tang Huan's face, and after that, he moved, and in the next moment, he appeared in front of the skeleton. At almost the same time, the 5 colors heavenly domain also followed suit and moved. The dozen or so skeletons that were gathered in front were blasted backwards like kites with broken strings. Ho! Tang Huan casually raised his hand and slapped over. A terrifying power followed the force of the palm and roared out, like a violent storm. Howl! Amidst the screams, the blood-red odor inside the skeleton's skull started to fluctuate rapidly. Its entire body was covered in a brilliant red light, its 2 claws were also desperately swung forward, the blood-red aura spread out from the phalanx. In an instant, it had created a terrifying blood-red storm. Bam! In a split second, the scarlet storm and the wave of genuine chi fiercely clashed together. In an earth-shattering explosion, the blood-red storm immediately shattered into pieces, while the genuine chi that erupted from Tang Huan's palm was like a hot knife through butter, smashing into the skeleton's claws. Kaka, kaka. The sound of bones breaking sounded out, and in the blink of an eye, the 2 arms of the skeleton had been shattered, while Tang Huan's palm had directly smashed into the skulls. Bam! Another bird cry sounded out, and the skull instantly ruptured. Soon after, the blood-red odor that revealed the fierce fluctuation inside seemed to be bound by an incomparably strong and invisible force, and as Tang Huan raised his hand, it was pulled out and landed on his palm. This skeleton truly had tyrannical strength. It was almost comparable to the special devil ape. Unfortunately, it had met Tang Huan, and to the current Tang Huan, no matter how strong a peak stage 9 ranker was, they would not be able to take 1.5 moves from him. The skeleton fell to the ground. Its bones were scattered and the blood on its surface was quickly drained. Tang Huan, on the other hand, did not hesitate and once again activated heart-twining and soul-searching method on the skeleton's soul. This skeleton was even stronger. The memories it had from its soul would definitely surpass that of the level 8 skeleton. But not long later, Tang Huan frowned helplessly as he remembered that in the skeleton's memory, there were only endless skeletons. There wouldn't be much of a difference compared to the skeleton in front of him. However, Tang Huan was not discouraged. This foggy sea island was very vast. Even if the people from the secluded Night Divine Palace left their traces, not every skeleton would be able to see it. He had just arrived at Foggy Sea Island. How could he be so lucky as to find secluded Night Divine Palace the moment he arrived? After a while, Tang Huan calmed himself down. Tang Huan, on the other hand, did not waste the soul of the peak stage 9 skeleton. With a roar that sounded like a dragon's roar, the pike transformed into the figure of the 8 remoteness Dragon King, opened his mouth, and swallowed the lump of blood-red odor that Tang Huan threw at him. Whoosh! Immediately after, Tang Huan's body became like a ray of light, flying forward, while the 5 colors heavenly domain shrank at the same time, enveloping a radius of a few meters. As for the conqueror spear that had already transformed into the 8 remoteness Dragon King, it looked like a living being that possessed intelligence as it flew around outside the boundaries of the heavenly domain at a fast speed. Howl! Ugh! Shrill cries rang out one after another. As Tang Huan continuously moved forward, skeletons would seemingly explode and shatter at every moment as their souls were devoured by the 8 remoteness Dragon King. A skeleton with the strength of only the 8th stage was not a match for the 8 remoteness Dragon King at all. Even if there were many of them, they wouldn't be of any threat to the skeleton. As for the few stage 9 skeletons that popped up occasionally, they were all personally taken care of by Tang Huan himself, his soul extracted and used heart-twining and soul-searching method. Unknowingly, the number of souls devoured by the 8 Remoteness Dragon King had already reached more than 1,000, and among them, the number of Stage 9 skeletons had reached 5. Fortunately, the skeletons here were from the Foggy Sea Island S. Otherwise, the skeleton army might have been able to easily sweep through the Origin Continent S, Glory Continent S and Holy Spirit Continent S. Even the Tranquil Continent S with Fentian as their strength might not be able to resist the skeletons. In such a small place, there were already 5 Stage 9 skeletons. In the entire Foggy Sea Island, there were hundreds of Stage 9 skeletons, and there might even be skeletons comparable to the Heavenly Domain level expert S. Tang Huan thought for a while, but his speed did not decrease at all. The 8 Remoteness Dragon King did not stop either. The current 8 Remoteness Dragon King was still just at the peak Stage 9 level. There was a huge gap between him and the spirits of Dragon Slaughtering Saber, Halberd Painting, Dragon Tongue Bow and so on. However, luckily he had the Heavenly Luo Soul Refining Art. After 8 Remoteness Dragon King consumes enough skeletons and souls, he could then refine it and would be able to greatly increase his strength. It's about time. After a long while, Tang Huan's eyes started to move. Outside of the Heavenly Domain, the 8 Remoteness Dragon King was already at its limit. It took a long time for the soul of the skeleton at the 8th step to be devoured. In a blink of an eye, Tang Huan extended his hand out and grabbed, causing 8 Remoteness Dragon King to once again transform into the appearance of a conqueror spear, transforming into a ray of dark red light that penetrated through Heavenly Domain and landed in his palm. There were still many skeletons around that charged forward crazily, but Tang Huan didn't care in the slightest. In an instant, he sat down cross-legged in the middle of the white skeletons all over the place, and then the conqueror's spear lay horizontally in front of him. Both of his palms gently caressed the spear's body, and his eyes closed. Whistling sounds came out one after another, as the skeletons rushed towards 5 Colors Heavenly Domain crazily. Inside the Heavenly Domain, Tang Huan had already activated the Heavenly Luo Soul Search technique. A strange undulation spread out from the depths of his soul, followed the guidance of Tang Huan's palms, and seeped into the body of the Conqueror's spear. Buzz. In a split second, the Conqueror's spear began to tremble. The intense ringing sounds could be heard incessantly, and the Conqueror's spear also emitted a strange fluctuation. At this time, a miraculous resonance appeared between Tang Huan's soul and the artifact spirit. A tyrannical and gentle power was born, and wrapped around the body of the spear like a fishnet, layer upon layer. Time passed bit by bit. Tang Huan's body was like a statue, standing unmoving. The surrounding skeletons were unable to shake the 5 Colors Heavenly Domain, who had already shrunk greatly, but the activity outside the Heavenly Domain was getting bigger and bigger, and the number of skeletons that were attracted to the Heavenly Domain was also increasing. But after a while, the skeletons suddenly quieted down, and the entire area became deathly silent. Chapter 662. 4 Great Skeletons. Ho! In the midst of the fog, a red figure suddenly flashed out. It was also a skeleton, but it was very different from all the skeletons that had appeared before. Inside his head, the lump of blood-red odor was as big as a bowl and actually filled up all the space within it. In addition, all of the bones that made up its body were covered in a dense layer of blood, as if there were countless blood vessels sticking to them. What was even more shocking was that around the skeleton was actually a huge ball of blood-red odor, and as it moved forward, the group of blood-red odor also moved about like surging waves. In an instant, they smashed onto Tang Huan's 5 Colors Heavenly Domain with a earth-shattering force, causing a terrifying aura to billow outwards. When the blood-red skeleton appeared, the surrounding skeletons all went silent and did not move at all. Huh? Tang Huan gasped in a low voice, and her slightly closed eyes suddenly opened. False Heavenly Domain? Just as he finished speaking, Tang Huan's body shot forward, and the 5 Colors Heavenly Domain instantly expanded, enveloping all of Blood-Red Skeleton within. Woo-yoo-yoo-yoo! Blood-Red Skeleton suddenly roared out. His sound was condensed and real, as though it could even pierce a hole through space. Almost at the same time the voice came out, The blood-red odor on the surface of its body surged like ocean waves stirred by a hurricane, resisting the pressure of the five colors' heavenly domain. At this moment, Tang Huan couldn't help but be pleasantly surprised. He didn't think that he would encounter such a strong skeleton, judging from his aura. Although this blood-red skeleton could not compare to the demon Lord Fentian before he stepped into the heavenly domain, he was not far off from the current Feng Ming. This kind of skeleton was probably one of the strongest existences in the Foggy Sea Island. If he could extract his soul and use the heart-twining and soul-searching method to extract his memories, his gains would definitely be incomparable to those of the skeletons from before. In a flash of a thought, the five colors' heavenly domain began to fluctuate rapidly, and an exceptionally terrifying pressure swept in from all directions. Bam! The group of blood-red odor around the skeleton's body surged even more intensely. However, the skeleton was unable to continue any longer after a short while. An earth-shaking explosive sound echoed, and the fake heavenly domain that was activated by the skeleton instantly disappeared without a trace. Howl! Not only did the blood-red skeleton not escape, he even waved the thick leg bone in his hand and smashed it towards Tang Huan. It was Tang Huan's first time seeing leg bones like that. Its length had reached an astonishing 2 meters. Its entire body was as black as ink and had a metallic luster. It looked like an incomparably hard iron rod. Kai, without the slightest hesitation, the conqueror's spear in Tang Huan's hand thrust it out. It was fast like lightning, the dazzling red light surging out from the spear's body, causing people's eyes to be dazzled. Along with the red light, a terrifying heat also exploded out. The spear was as fast as lightning, and the heat also quickly condensed. It swirled forward and whizzed forward. In an instant, it forcefully landed on that dark black leg bone. Boom! The strength chi stirred up, and with a violent surge of heat, it passed through the skeleton's body. Immediately, fine cracks started to appear on the surface of its body. And under the violent and shocking force, the dark black leg bone in his hand exploded from the center, breaking into pieces. The phalanxes on his hands were also broken into pieces. Howl! Blood-red skeleton's cry was filled with fear. She suddenly turned and ran without hesitation. However, within the range of Tang Huan's heavenly domain, his escaping speed was greatly slowed down. Tang Huan sneered in his heart. Although this skeleton could activate the fake heavenly domain, it was still not the real heavenly domain level expert, so Tang Huan could still easily take care of it. It just took a bit more effort. Following that, Tang Huan's footsteps moved slightly, and he appeared behind the blood-red skeleton. The conqueror's spear in his hands smashed down brazenly with boundless energy, its speed as fast as lightning. The skeleton had no time to dodge at all, as the tip of the spear had already smashed onto its head. Bam! The skull instantly exploded, and the blood-red odor ran out as if it wanted to escape. But at the same time, Tang Huan grabbed forward with his claws. The powerful sucking power firmly held onto the ball of soul in his palm. Although it was frantically struggling, like a dragonfly stuck to a spider web, no matter how much it struggled, it could not escape. I hope we can reap some rewards this time. In an instant, Tang Huan had already activated the heart-twining and soul-searching method once again. At this moment, Tang Huan seemed to have become one with the skeleton soul, and pieces of memories that existed within the skeleton soul also began to quickly flash past Tang Huan's mind. Tang Huan watched the show quickly as if he was walking on a lantern. It had to be said that the experience of this blood-red skeleton was much richer than that of the skeletons that had searched for souls before Tang Huan. This skeleton was far more powerful than the other skeletons. He was like a sovereign of the world in the northwest part of the island. No skeleton dared to disobey his command. Due to its tyrannical strength, the skeleton did not stay in the northwest part of the island. It had traveled to other parts of the island many times before and also saw 3 other skeletons that were on par with its strength. They occupied the northeast, southeast and southwest respectively. At the time of their clash, this skeleton had also engaged in a huge battle with the other 3 skeletons. However, other than this, there was nothing else. In the skeleton's memory, other than Tang Huan who just killed it, there was no one else. After a long while, Tang Huan sighed with disappointment. Still nothing. Could it be that the secluded Night Divine Palace person had some sort of invisibility? This skeleton's memories were indeed very clear. Tang Huan calculated that its memories had lasted for at least 10 years or so. As for why it was like this, Tang Huan still did not know. 10 years seemed to be the exact time when the Lingzhou Arch would appear. However, whether it was because of the Lingzhou Arch or not, it did not have much to do with what Tang Huan was about to do right now. Lightly shaking his head, Tang Huan summoned his Conqueror Spear and the figure of 8 Remoteness Dragon King appeared in his mind. But just as Tang Huan was prepared to throw the blood-red skeleton soul into his gaping mouth, he seemed to have thought of something and his right hand that was clutching his soul suddenly squat down in the air. In the next moment, Tang Huan's eyes closed. His mind once again immersed itself into the memories the skeleton soul had. After a long while, Tang Huan suddenly gasped. Both his eyes suddenly opened, revealing a look of doubt. In the blood-red skeleton's memories, when it was fighting a strong skeleton, an abnormal movement seemed to have occurred in that area. For a short period of time, many of the ordinary skeletons there seemed to have suffered some sort of inexplicable interference, and their movements actually became somewhat chaotic. That place was the southeastern part of the Foggy Sea Island. Chapter 663, Phalanx. Southeast. As he softly muttered these 2 words, Tang Huan lifted his hand and threw the soul of the blood-red skeleton into the body of the 8 Remoteness Dragon King. Previously, Tang Huan had used the Heavenly Luo Soul refining art to completely refine the skulls and souls that the 8 Remoteness Dragon King devoured. But now, the artifact spirit of the Conqueror Spear had become even more powerful. However, if it could devour all 3 skeletons and souls with a strength similar to blood-red skeletons, it believed it would be able to pass through that hurdle. To this kind of artifact spirit, it was much easier to cross the barrier between the Stage 9 and the Heavenly Domain. Since there has been movement in that direction, let's go over and take a look first. In an instant, Tang Huan flapped his wings and soared into the sky. The memories he had just obtained from the blood-red skeleton soul was the only clue he had found out so far, so he naturally could not miss it. Goo! Abruptly, a thunderous sound burst out from the layers of fog, reverberating in the air above the island. Yeah! Zhao Budian could not help but exclaim out loud, her small claws pointing towards the northeastern part of Foggy Sea Island. Tang Huan frowned slightly. In his senses, Feng Ming was right at that place, and what came from that place was Zhao Ai's shout, which was filled with anger. Could it be that Feng Ming and Zhao Ai had met a strong enemy? It seemed unlikely. However, that kind of blood-red skeleton's might was only when compared to normal skeletons. They were not Heavenly Domain level experts, and even the Demon Lord Fentianus back then were slightly inferior, unable to threaten Zhao Ai at all. Since it was not a skeleton, could it be the Hall Master of the Secluded Night Divine Palace? It seems impossible. Secluded Night Divine Palace's Hall Master's strength was on par with Aunt Xing's, so she was similarly not a match for the super-strong Zhao Ai. Since it was neither, then what made Zhao Ai angry? Tang Huan's mind raced, but his movements were not slow. In an instant, he was already flying. Not long after, Tang Huan and Zhao Budian arrived in the air above the northeast part of the island. During this process, Tang Huan had heard Zhao Ai's earth-shaking cries multiple times, which had actually become more and more agitated and angry. This made Tang Huan a little worried. Following the connection between Tang Huan's soul and his body, Tang Huan quickly teleported through the air. After a while, Tang Huan was right above Feng Ming. He immediately withdrew his wings and quickly floated down. When they had almost touched the clouds, 5 colors Heavenly Domain had also spread out from Tang Huan's body, but he did not expand like before. Instead, he shrunk to the limit and only covered Zhao Budian and himself within. The clouds and mist churned around him as Tang Huan's figure plummeted down. But after a while, Tang Huan frowned. The surrounding mist seemed to have become strange, but before he could understand what was going on, his feet had already stepped on the ground. In Tang Huan's body, the 9 Yang Divine Furnace and the 5 colors spiritual pills circulated swiftly. meticulously sensing their surroundings. However, after just 1 or 2 breaths of time, Tang Huan's face had an additional trace of suspicion. According to the connection between their souls, they could be sure that Feng Ming was right nearby, and the distance between them should not be more than 50 meters. But from what Tang Huan could sense, Feng Ming actually did not exist, and not only did she not exist, Zhao Ai, who had let out a heaven-shaking roar several times before, also did not show any signs of existence. Yeah, Zhao Budian obviously noticed this as well. He tilted his head and blinked his eyes doubtfully. Strange. Couldn't help but mutter to himself when he recalled the abnormality that he had detected before he landed. His brows were knitted even tighter, and within his mind instructs. In a second, the Five Colors heavenly domain had expanded to the limit and enveloped an area of over 100 meters. What made Tang Huan even more suspicious was that while the heavenly domain was expanding, he did not encounter a single skeleton. This was completely illogical. Tang Huan's mind started working at a speed that he never had before. In the blink of an eye, a beam of light flashed through his mind. At this moment, Tang Huan couldn't help but think of the Forgotten City. Back then, in the seas near Forgotten City, he had encountered the demonic illusion formation that the Xuanming Ghost King had used to create the illusory demon orb. That incomparably huge illusion array actually covered the entire Forgotten City. The current situation was extremely similar to that of the past. Tang Huan's mind raced. After entering the Foggy Sea Island, he had killed many skeletons, and he believed that Feng Ming and Zhao Ai were no exception. If the secluded Night Divine Palace was really hiding in the Foggy Sea Island, it was impossible for them to not notice the commotion occurring in the northern part of the island. Hopefully Feng Ming and Zhao Ai did not separate, otherwise, Feng Ming would very likely be in danger. He had to break this illusion array as soon as possible. Tang Huan's heart was filled with anxiousness. He took a deep breath and forced himself to calm down, then sat cross-legged on the ground and started sensing. If their judgment was not wrong, the formation that trapped Feng Ming and Zhao Ai must have been set up in a hurry. As long as one could find the traces left behind when laying down the formation, there was hope for breaking the formation. Unknowingly, Tang Huan had already closed his eyes. Within the Five Colors heavenly domain, there were corpses everywhere. His attention was focused on those bones. Since it was a formation, it meant that there was definitely something within it. As for the thing that was carrying the formation, it was definitely not air, but some sort of object. That kind of material could very well be hidden within the bones. Tang Huan calmed his heart and carefully investigated. Under these circumstances, his perception ability had already reached an incomparably shocking level. After about a dozen or so breaths of time, Tang Huan suddenly opened his eyes, and within his eyes, 2 unusually sharp rays of light shot out. In the next moment, Tang Huan was already in the air. He moved to the left about 10 meters, and looked at the pile of bones in front of him. There were such skeletons everywhere in the Foggy Sea Island, and no matter where they were, they would not attract attention. But just now, Tang Huan could feel a very minute fluctuation of energy from them. With a wave of his sleeve, the strength chi flipped and the shattered bones flew outwards, revealing a bone hidden underneath. The bone was about a foot long and pitch black. Tang Huan had once seen a bone like this before, and the blood-red skeleton he had killed before was now using this bone as a weapon. However, blood-red skeleton used a thick leg bone, and this bone was a phalanx. Tang Huan extended his hand out and grabbed, and the phalanx that was stabbed into the ground fell into his palm. As a weapon refining grandmaster, Tang Huan could tell with a glance that it was a set of spirit maps. Closing the phalanx in his palm, Tang Huan's mind once again calmed down. Chapter 664, Breaking Formation. This piece of phalanx, and even the other corpses on the ground, had been covered by the clouds over the years, and were unavoidably submerged by the energy contained in the clouds. The aura it emitted had already completely merged with the fluctuations of the clouds, becoming a single entity that covered the entire island. However, this was only an appearance. Under this enormous aura fluctuation, There was also another aura fluctuation that was concealed. The source of this fluctuation was the spirit map S on the phalanx. Under the cover of the strong energy fluctuations from the clouds and mist, it was so weak that it could be disregarded. Forget about Stage 9 rankers. Even the average heavenly domain level expert would not necessarily be able to discover the abnormality of the cloud and mist. Fortunately, Tang Huan had surpassed the Stage 9, and his heavenly domain had received a huge increase, otherwise, he wouldn't have noticed it either. Now, with the phalanx in his hands, what Tang Huan needed to do was to use this piece of phalanx to find other things to carry the spirit ray. After all, it was impossible for a large-scale formation to have only one object. As long as it did not exist in isolation, it could find out everything else through the connection between them. Of course, Tang Huan could also destroy the piece of phalanx. If he lacked one thing, the operation of the spirit array would definitely be affected. Only, in a situation where he could not be certain whether the impact was great or small, Tang Huan decided to adopt a more stable method for the time being. After a moment, a smile appeared on Tang Huan's face. He then leaped up and shot towards the left and rear. In about a dozen or so breaths of time, a second black phalanx appeared in Tang Huan's hands, but he did not stop, and immediately flew in another direction. As time passed, the amount of black phalanx he found also increased. 3, 4, 6, 7, 8. Tang Huan's figure that was flashing with speed had finally stopped. When the eighth piece of phalanx arrived, the flow of clouds and mist in this area finally underwent a change. Previously, the cloud and mist seemed to be rotating clockwise, which was completely different from the situation on the entire island. But now, the cloud and mist started to show signs of being able to move freely. But this sign was not very clear. It could be seen that after losing the eighth piece of phalanx, the spirit ray did not collapse. If he wanted to break the formation, he had to find even more phalanx, but right now, he could only find these 8. Tang Huan frowned. He suddenly realized that he seemed to have entered into a misunderstanding. When he landed, he was already trapped in the spiritual array. If it was an ordinary spirit formation, it would not be able to trap him, who was already in heavenly domain level expert, but this spirit formation was different. Even if it was only a small part of it, it was still incredibly terrifying. After all, the situation outside the array was completely different from the situation inside. Outside of the spiritual array, no matter how intense the clouds and mist were, they were not meant for him. With his powerful sun spirit body, even if he did not activate the heavenly domain, he would still be able to withstand the terrifying pressure. However, when he was in the spiritual array, under the guidance of the spiritual array, the effects of the cloud would increase exponentially. Fortunately, this spiritual array did not have any offensive power. Otherwise, he might not have been able to withstand it. Tang Huan thought quickly. Right now, he could only find the 8th piece of phalanx, which meant that he was obviously disturbed by the spirit ray. Since he could not sense the connection between the phalanx, then he would directly use the spirit map to deduce, and would still be able to find the location of the other phalanx. The corner of Tang Huan's mouth hooked into a sneer. After that, he sat cross-legged and picked up a piece of phalanx to carefully inspect it. In just a moment, a picture of a spirit map appeared in his mind, and Tang Huan immediately took out the second piece of phalanx, doing the same thing. Tang Huan's current perception ability and probing ability were both at their limits, and in just the span of a few dozen breaths, he had already passed through all 8 pieces of phalanx. Tang Huan did not hesitate at all, and immediately began to calculate the 8 spirit maps in his mind. To deduce the unknown spirit map from the known spirit map, this was definitely not a simple feat. Of course, this was only for ordinary weapon refining Grandmaster S. No matter whether it was Tang Huan's attainments in spirit map or his deductive ability, both had already far surpassed the limit of this small world's weapon refining Grandmaster. To Tang Huan, this was equivalent to forging a set of divine armament S. Tang Huan closed his eyes and immersed himself completely, not knowing how much time had passed, yet in his mind, the number of spirit maps were constantly increasing. 10, 12, 15 of them, 20 pieces, 30 pictures, 50 pieces, 64. Unknowingly, the number of spirit maps had increased from 8 to 64, which was 8 times the number at the start. Tang Huan slowly opened his eyes and a satisfied smile finally emerged on his face. 64 spirit map meant 64 piece of phalanx. The location of the initial 8 spirit maps and the 8 piece of phalanxes were corresponded to each other. The location of the other 56 piece of phalanx were instantly displayed clearly. It's about time. Tang Huan stood up and followed the direction of the spirit map in his mind. With a flick of a finger, the 9th piece of phalanx entered his hand. Tang Huan's figure did not slow down at all as he continued to fly between the corpses, and soon, more and more black phalanx were found. The more phalanx that were pulled out from the ground, the more obvious the scattering of the surrounding clouds. When the 40th piece of phalanx was pulled out, the surrounding clouds and mist had completely dissipated. Gu. Almost at the same time, Zhao Ai's long missed bird cry entered his ears once again. Ever since it had entered the array, Tang Huan had not heard a single sound from it, but right now, its voice had pierced through the isolation of the clouds, meaning that the spirit formation had completely collapsed. Whoosh! Tang Huan did not hesitate at all, immediately expanding his heavenly domain to its maximum, following the sound and shooting forward. In the blink of an eye, a red figure had already entered Tang Huan's line of sight. It was Feng Ming, who was currently seated cross-legged on the ground, while Zhao anxiously paced back and forth in front of her. The transparent, formless heavenly domain enveloped both of their figures, and a black figure was lying in front of Feng Ming. Gu gu. The moment Tang Huan saw Feng Ming, Zhao also noticed Tang Huan and immediately cried out in excitement. In the next moment, Feng Ming, who was seated cross-legged on the ground, also looked over in a blink of an eye as well. Saying that, he pointed to the motionless black figure in front of him. "Come over and take a look at this fellow that we caught." "Oh, who is this?" Tang Huan was surprised. With a slight movement of his feet, he appeared in front of Feng Ming. Chapter 665 had finally arrived. It must be related to the secluded Night Divine Palace. Feng Ming laughed and said, "When we were near, we encountered a very powerful skeleton. Just as Zhao killed it, this guy sneaked out. The moment Zhao and I grabbed him, we fell into the spirit array, unable to charge out no matter how hard we tried. At this point, Zhao Ai's heavenly domain will not be able to hold on any longer. Fortunately you broke this formation in time, otherwise, once this heavenly domain disappears, Zhao and I would be dead soon." As he finished speaking, Feng Ming had subconsciously stopped smiling. There was still a sense of relief on his face. The moment Feng Ming finished speaking, Zhao Ai's heavenly domain had already disappeared, jumping onto Tang Huan's shoulder, revealing a tired look. "Zhao Ai, it's been hard on you." Rubbing the little white rabbit's head, Tang Huan immediately stretched out his arm and grabbed the black shadow that was crawling on the ground. It was actually a middle-aged man wearing a black robe, with his eyes tightly shut. "This fellow seems to be the bait that the secluded Night Divine Palace threw out." Tang Huan muttered to himself. The reason he appeared seemed to be to lure Feng Ming and Zhao into the spirit array. Hearing this, Feng Ming subconsciously nodded his head. "I think so too." Moreover, this fellow was extremely strange. Even though it was clearly just by the side, those skeletons seemed to completely ignore it. "When I was trapped here, I searched and found this on his body." As he said that, Feng Ming took out a white jade slip that was about 3 fingers wide, and said, "The reason he was able to avoid being attacked by the skeletons should be because of it. So that's how it is." Tang Hua took it, and after sensing it for a bit, he suddenly realized, not only could this piece of jade absorb the energy emitted from within the body, it could also constantly emit the same aura fluctuations as the surrounding fog. If one carried it on their body, the skeleton would treat it as a cloud. After all, skeletons did not rely on their eyes, but on the perception ability. No wonder they were unable to find any trace of the skeletons and souls despite having collected them multiple times. It turned out that they were simply unable to detect the existence of the people from the secluded Night Divine Palace. In a blink of an eye, Tang Huan's palm had already pressed down on the middle-aged man's head. After a while, a misty white chi floated out of his head like a mist, and quickly condensed into a ball in Tang Huan's palm. This middle-aged man was only a martial lord at the peak of the 8th step. With his strength, he basically could not pose any threat to Feng Ming. He was obviously just a cannon fodder thrown out by the secluded Night Divine Palace. As long as they could take Feng Ming and Zhao down, it didn't matter whether he lived or died. The method that the secluded Night Divine Palace used was very simple and effective. If not for Tang Huan being able to break the spirit array in time, they would have succeeded. But now, they had to bear the consequences of exposing their nest. Without any hesitation, Tang Huan immediately used the heart-twining and soul-searching method to search the man's memories. After a long while, Tang Huan actually frowned. This middle-aged man's soul was extremely weak, and his memories were also extremely chaotic. All kinds of scenes were mixed together, like a lump of paste. If it was in the past, Tang Huan might not understand the reason why, but now, Tang Huan knew that the middle-aged man's soul must have merged with something inside the soul seal. After he was captured by Feng Ming, the operator immediately ignited the soul seal in his body. Although the man wasn't dead, he was definitely insane. Under these circumstances, even if he fell into someone else's hands, it would be impossible for them to get anything out of him. Unfortunately, the mastermind behind him had still underestimated Tang Huan's strength. Facing a crazy person, ordinary people would definitely not be able to do anything. But Tang Huan, who had cultivated the soul method, true explanation, was an exception. Although the middle-aged man's memories were in chaos, they weren't completely shattered. As long as the memories remained, he would be able to restore the memory fragments to a complete image. It was just that it would take a bit more time. Tang Huan snorted from the nose, as his mind once again immersed himself into the ball of soul in his palm. Time passed bit by bit. After about half an hour, Tang Huan finally revealed a faint smile. Feng Ming, let's go. You already have an idea? In the southeastern part of Foggy Sea Island, the area was shrouded in clouds and mist. Whoosh, whiz. Amidst inaudible piercing sounds, Tang Huan and Feng Ming's figures swooped down from the sky and landed on the shore. The 5 colors heavenly domain immediately covered the two of them, as well as Zhao Budian and Zhai, who were squatting on his shoulder. After exchanging glances with Feng Ming, the two of them had already quickly walked into the dense fog. At this time, Tang Huan had already pushed the 5 colors heavenly domain to the limit. The few skeletons that were originally wandering along the shore were immediately pushed out of the heavenly domain. Waves of ear-piercing wails came from inside the skulls. Outside of the heavenly domain, there were more and more skeletons, and the noise became louder and louder. The wails rose and fell one after another, converging into an earth-shaking sound wave that surged back and forth in the air, as though it could tear one's eardrums. Woo-yoo-yoo-yoo. Suddenly, an exceptionally sharp bird cry echoed from afar, immediately suppressing the surrounding noise and chaos. For a moment, silence reigned outside the 5 colors heavenly domain. It's finally here. Tang Huan raised his brows, a smile appearing in his eyes. He did not kill the surrounding skeletons. Instead, he allowed them to gather, creating a growing commotion. He wanted to lure out the strongest skeleton in the southeast region. Now, he had finally reached his destination. Only 2 or 3 breaths' time later, a blood-red figure appeared outside the heavenly domain. Shockingly, it was the kind of skeleton that Tang Huan had seen before, whose skeleton surface was almost completely covered in blood threads. Ho! In the instant that the bone and blood-red skeleton's hands smashed onto 5 colors heavenly domain started to fluctuate rapidly, and in an instant, he was within blood-red skeleton's reach. However, this skeleton seemed to be smarter than the skeleton that Tang Huan had killed before. Just as it rushed into the 5 colors heavenly domain, it sensed that something was amiss. The blood-red odor gushed out, and tried to resist the pressure of the 5 colors heavenly domain with all its might, but its figure immediately retreated. However, Tang Huan had lured it over with great difficulty, so how could he let it escape so easily? Whoosh! In the next moment, Tang Huan's body shot forward like lightning and the five colors heavenly domain also surged forward. The blood-red skeleton that was originally at the edge of the heavenly domain immediately arrived at the center of the heavenly domain, and the conqueror's spear in Tang Huan's hands carried a monstrous strength chi. Chapter 666, Wooden Leaf Spirit Heart. A heavenly domain level expert. A peak stage 9 skeleton that could only activate a fake heavenly domain. This battle had no suspense at all. After a while, blood-red skeleton was already lying on the ground, and in Tang Huan's palm was an additional ball of dense blood-red odor, fiercely struggling. However, under the heart-twining and soul-searching method, the blood-red skeleton soul quickly quieted down. Finally complete. Not long after, Tang Huan smiled. He could only lure the blood-red skeleton with one goal, and that was to gather the terrain of the southeast region from his memories. Although the skeleton had no eyes, it could sense the terrain through its senses. This skeleton was very powerful. In its memory, the topography of the skeleton was far more complete than that of an ordinary skeleton. Tang Huan, do you know the exact location of the secluded Night Divine Palace now? Hearing this, a hint of happiness flashed through Feng Ming's beautiful eyes. If I'm not mistaken, it should be that place. Tang Huan was laughing from between his brows, but then, a look of urgency appeared in his eyes. We need to hurry. They might be escaping right now. In the chaotic memory of the middle-aged man before, there were some memory fragments that appeared frequently. When put together, it was a palace built from a short mountain and a piece of white bone. Currently, after searching through the blood-red skeleton's memories, he had already faintly found the location of the short mountain. However, the place was dead and the person was alive. If the people of the secluded Night Divine Palace found out that the spirit formation placed northeast of the island had been broken, they would definitely not stay in their lair and wait for death. Once they escaped from Foggy Sea Island, it would be equivalent to searching for a needle in a haystack. After all, the Lingzhou Arch would appear very soon, so it was impossible for Tang Huan to miss this opportunity to find them. He would enter the Lingzhou Ancient Road 10 years later. That's right, we must not let them escape the Foggy Sea Island. Feng Ming was shocked. The others were fine, but it didn't matter even if they escaped. However, if the secluded Night Divine Palace's hallmaster managed to escape, the hidden danger would be huge. Since that guy had a lot of embodiment, if he hid himself, it would be impossible to find him in a short period of time. In the next moment, Feng Ming said again, Tang Huan, why don't Zhao and I go north to watch, just in case? Alright, this matter should not be delayed. All of you focus immediately. After pondering for a moment, Tang Huan nodded his head. If he had enough helpers, he would have to send people to each of the directions to handle the situation. But now, there were only him and Feng Ming left, and he could only choose to go to the north. After all, if someone were to escape, no matter which direction they were to leave the island, they would eventually head north. Ho! Feng Ming did not hesitate, and immediately brought Zhao and rushed into the sky. After confirming the direction according to the memories of the blood-red skeleton, Tang Huan also immediately flew through the violently surging clouds at a fast speed, as though he was flying. At this time, Tang Huan had already expanded the five colors heavenly domain to its limits. Numerous skeletons didn't even have time to react before they were flipped over by the heavenly domain. By the time they had regained their senses, Tang Huan and Zhao Budian, who had been covered by the five colors heavenly domain, had already left their perception range. Unknowingly, a low mountain peak had already entered Tang Huan's line of sight. The Foggy Sea Island was not completely flat. The mountain ranges and valleys crisscrossing the island. The short mountain in front of Tang Huan was normal and ordinary, compared to the other mountain peaks on the island. It wasn't anything special. The only difference was perhaps the withered tree at the foot of the mountain. Although the withered tree could not be compared to the Holy Spirit Continent's sacred cloud tree, it was still extremely large and would require at least 10 people holding hands to be able to hold it. This withered tree must have lost its life because of that great battle. After such a long period of time, it still retained its main stem and had not completely decayed. There were many such withered trees in the Foggy Sea Island. However, according to the picture that he pieced together from the middle-aged man's memories, This withered tree was the entrance to the secluded Night Divine Palace, but Tang Huan could not find the way to get in and out. Soon after, Tang Huan took big steps as if he was flying. While circling around the dried-up tree, he also carefully sensed the situation of the tree. After a short while, Tang Huan had stopped in his tracks. The aura the withered tree emitted was exactly the same as the surrounding clouds and mist. If he spent a little more time, perhaps he might be able to discover some clues, but what Tang Huan lacked the most was time. After all, no one knew if the secluded Night Divine Palace had any other exits. Spending a lot of time here meant that the people inside might have already escaped through other exits. In a blink of an eye, Tang Huan's right palm had already pressed down on the withered tree. An instant later, within Tang Huan's Danshan, the Nine Yang Divine Furnace had already been activated to its limit. A green flame whizzed out from his palm and continuously seeped into the trunk of the withered tree. This time, Tang Huan was no longer using Nirvana Sacred Fire, but Bodhisattva Fire. This Bodhisattva Fire belonged to the 5 elements of wood. It could burn life force, and it could also give it life force. What Tang Huan was doing now was fusing his life force into the withered tree. Of course, he could also use the Nirvana Sacred Fire to burn this dried-up tree, but if he did that, there might be 2 results. 1. The dried-up tree would be cremated and the hidden entrance would be revealed, and the second, the dried-up tree would be cremated and cause other accidents, which would result in the entrance being blocked. However, if this tree could be revived, Tang Huan would be able to clearly feel its internal situation. As one of the 5 great spiritual fires, the life force contained within Bodhisattva Fire was incomparably rich. Furthermore, Tang Huan had the sharp spiritual fire and Xuanming initial fire. Gold and water were born together, water and wood were born together, sharp spiritual fire nourished and grew. Under the assistance of Xuanming initial fire, the life force derived from Bodhisattva Fire became even more majestic. When this life force flooded in like a vast ocean, the lifeless surface of the withered tree actually began to grow a thin layer of emerald green bark, and its roots weaved through the soil like snakes. As the Bodhisattva Fire continued to seep into his body, the tender shoots began to sprout and the green leaves began to blossom. Not long after, a lush and verdant tree was revealed. However, this was only temporary. With Tang Huan's current strength, even if he had the Bodhisattva Fire, it was impossible for him to revive a large tree that had been withered for countless years in such a short period of time. Once Tang Huan stopped channeling the power of the Bodhisattva Fire, the tree would wither again very quickly. Fortunately, Tang Huan didn't have to completely revive this withered tree. In the next moment, Bodhisattva Fire gushed out of Tang Huan's right palm, and his left palm landed on a tree as well. A dense green aura roared out, and very quickly covered the entire tree. Hula! The big tree trembled slightly, as if it was trying to tell Tang Huan something. This was the wooden leaf spirit heart of the wood magic. After a withered tree regained its vitality, it could give birth to a weak spirit. With that bit of spiritual communication, Tang Huan would be able to obtain the information he needed. So that's how it is. In just a short span of a dozen breaths, the corner of Tang Huan's lips slightly raised, forming a faint smile. Following that, Tang Huan's figure flashed and appeared behind the tree. Both of his palms continued to smash onto the tree trunk, as streams of tyrannical genuine qi seeped in. After a short moment, a deep cracking sound could be heard, and a passageway slowly revealed itself. The large tree, however, had already begun to wither. Chapter 667, Initial Spirit Heavenly Crystal. Whoosh! Tang Huan did not hesitate, and immediately entered. The tunnel was several meters tall, and was quite wide. It was diagonally downwards. After a dozen meters, the walls were inlaid with white bones of various sizes. The bones continued to emit a pale luster, and a ghastly and terrifying aura spread out, causing one's hair to stand on end. Tang Huan's body was like a stream of light. His speed did not slow down in the slightest. The tunnel extended downwards in a straight line, and after about 100 meters, it started to move forward evenly. And after another 100 meters, Tang Huan's eyes suddenly opened up, and a vast palace appeared. The palace was about 50 meters tall and 30 to 40 meters wide. Just like the passageway outside, this palace was made up of countless bones. At the top of the stairs, there was an exceptionally tall and sturdy skeleton. Even if it was sitting cross-legged on the ground, its height would not be lower than 10 meters. And the strangest thing was that this skeleton had actually been transformed into a gigantic throne, looking down from above with an imposing manner. Standing below, looking at the chair, even Tang Huan could feel a strong sense of pressure coming from it. Of course, the sense of oppression did not come from the chair, but from the skeleton that held the seat. Tang Huan's mind slightly stirred. The bones of the Foggy Sea Island were all from the corpses that died in the great battle that year. The skeleton that sat at the top of the stairs must have been a supreme expert. Even after so many years had passed, its bones still glowed like precious gems. However, in the next moment, Tang Huan no longer paid attention to the skeleton. The inside of the white skeleton's palace was completely empty. There was no one there, nor was there any sound. Tang Huan frowned. In the blink of an eye, he had already appeared in the center of palace, and the 5 colors heavenly domain that he had activated with all his might had already enveloped every corner of the palace inside. Yeah, yeah. Zhao Budian suddenly raised her claws and pointed to the right. At a corner, there was a colorful and shiny little mountain, and what was formed there were all saint-grade gem, releasing powerful qi one after another, intermixed together. Tang Huan only took a glance before retracting his gaze and turning to the left in the blink of an eye. In the corner, saint-grade gems piled up like a mountain, and in the corner to the left was another small mountain. Gathering together to form that small mountain, it was a type of thing the size of a cherry. Each and every one of them emitted a dense and powerful aura. That is, initial spirit heavenly crystal. A hint of surprise that was difficult to conceal flashed past Tang Huan's eyes, but right after, he couldn't help but get excited. He had heard the words initial spirit heavenly crystal from Lu Iao. According to his introduction, this was a type of crystal particle that was derived from the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Although it was small, it contained a boundless amount of power. It was said that in the divine great world, many people cultivated using initial spirit heavenly crystal. Other than that, on forging God Great World's side, the currency used was neither gold nor gold. It was this kind of initial spirit heavenly crystal. Who knew that the secluded night divine palace would collect so many initial spirit heavenly crystal? Who knew where he had found them? With such a large pile, there were at least several thousand or even more than 10,000 of them. Suddenly, Tang Huan raised his eyebrows, but quickly recovered from the pleasant surprise, and muttered. Immediately after, Tang Huan's figure moved and actually appeared at the top of the stairs like lightning. On the wall behind the chair, there was a radius of a few meters that was rapidly fluctuating. After sensing it carefully for a moment, Tang Huan understood that there was a teleportation array formation, and it was one way at that. He really came a step too late. Tang Huan's face turned gloomy. He did not sense any signs of life from the white skeleton's palace. It was clear that all the people from the secluded night divine palace had fled, and it was very likely that they had just left. Just like the demon Lord Fentian, where his embodiment was killed, the teleportation circle was immediately destroyed. Since we haven't destroyed the transmission array in time, we might as well chase after them and take a look. Tang Huan thought for a while. Even if the people of the secluded night divine palace were lying in ambush at the teleportation circle, preparing to attack the moment he appeared, he was not afraid. Furthermore, the Hall Master of the secluded night divine palace should not be so foolish. If he was facing an enemy with similar strength, secluded night divine palace master had a high chance of winning. However, Tang Huan's strength far surpassed his. If he were to continue doing this, it would be equivalent to bringing shame upon himself. Currently, the news of Tang Huan killing the demon Lord Fentian had already spread throughout the world, so it was impossible for the secluded night divine palace to not know of it. In a moment, Tang Huan arrived in front of the wall, but just as he was about to step into the teleportation circle, his body suddenly froze. That's not right. Tang Huan's heart skipped a beat. Since the Lord of Secluded Night Divine Palace was unable to set up a trap, it did not make sense for him to keep the teleportation circle. After all, with his power, destroying the teleport formation was not difficult at all. That guy kept the teleportation circle. Could it be because he didn't run away at all? If an ordinary person were to find this place and discover that there was no one here, and then see the teleportation formation, they would probably pass through it and chase after them at the first possible moment. As soon as the pursuers left, if that fellow was still hiding here, he would have ample time to pack his things and then leisurely leave the palace. With so many Saint-grade gem and initial spirit heavenly crystal, no one would be willing to give up. Based on this conjecture, it was very likely that the rest of the Secluded Night Divine Palace's people had escaped the palace through the teleportation array, but the Hall Master might still be here. After thinking about it, Tang Huan immediately made a decision. With a dragon's roar, the Conqueror's spear turned into a Tremotinous Dragon King and stood in front of the teleportation nexus. Tang Huan himself moved his feet slightly, returning to the center of the White Skeleton's palace. Once, twice, 5 times, 6 times. Even after continuously inspecting the entire White Skeleton's palace more than 10 times, he still did not discover anything. Tang Huan was not anxious at all, but he changed his method. With a space moving, Tang Huan appeared in the corner at the front right, and then he took out the space aircraft. With a thought, the small flying shuttle returned to its original form, floating above the pile of gems. The intense buzzing sound came out, and the Saint-grade gem below rose up one by one, entering the inner parts of the space aircraft. In less than 10 breaths, this small mountain of gems had already disappeared without a trace. Tang Huan's footsteps did not stop. He immediately appeared at the corner on the left, doing the same. Chapter 668, Xuan Yuan Sword, Exquisite Carving Bow. Seemingly the instant that the initial spirit heavenly crystal rose, Tang Huan's expression changed, and a smile appeared on his lips. Although he did not stop collecting the initial spirit heavenly crystal after that, his speed had slowed down by a lot, and after a long while, Tang Huan finally collected all the initial spirit heavenly crystal. In between mind instructs, in a second, the flying shuttle-like space aircraft had already regained its calm, and then, it quickly shrank, being placed in Tang Huan's embrace. "Old fellow, are you still not planning to come out?" Raising his head to look at the gigantic chair placed at the top of the stairs, Tang Huan suddenly shouted out. However, after he finished speaking, the other side of the line was completely silent. There was no movement at all from beginning to end. Whoosh! Tang Huan laughed indifferently, and in the next moment, his figure appeared by the side of the chair, and with a grab, a fiery red light flashed, and a gigantic sword appeared in his hand. The sword's hilt was as red as fire. This fiery red aura spread over the gauntlet and gathered into a bundle that continued to extend forward along the middle of the broadsword. When it was about to reach the tip, it quietly shrank until it disappeared. As for the other parts of the sword, they had a lustrous black color, as if a ghostly light was flickering on the sword. The brilliant red light intertwined with the black light, causing the entire sword to exude a mysterious charm in addition to the powerful qi that continuously flowed out. This was the Xuan Yuan sword. Tang Huan had consecutively forged over a dozen divine armaments, but he had only left 3 for himself. One was a dragon slaughtering saber, one was a exquisite carving bow, and the other was this enormous sword. The name of the sword was Xuan Yuan. Buzz! Amidst the intense ringing sounds, the huge sword slightly trembled and a fiery red intent quickly spread. In an instant, the entire sword had become as red as fire, and a dazzling red radiance exploded outwards. Tang Huan's wrist turned, and with a sudden swing of the gigantic sword, the red light condensed into a substantial substance, bringing about a heat that overflowed into the sky. It swept towards the chair like a waterfall. Its power was extremely terrifying. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! An instant later, a deafening explosion rang out in the air. The instant the seat exploded, a black shadow shot up into the sky and floated down to the bottom of the stairs. After he landed on the ground, the black shadow didn't stop at all and immediately flew towards the passageway like a meteor. "Where do you think you're going?" Tang Huan sneered. The Xuan Yuan sword left his hands and transformed into a fire-red huge tiger, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws at the black figure. At almost the same time, a sparkling and translucent jade longbow appeared in Tang Huan's palm. This was the exquisite carving bow. Its bow body had a golden and white color. Its shape was extremely strange, as though it was a huge eagle soaring in the sky. Tang Huan's eyes were cold as he suddenly nocked an arrow on his bow. A thick strand of white-colored odor walked out from the tip of his finger, and in that moment, it condensed into a white arrow, which released an incomparably sharp and fierce aura. Bang! Tang Huan's finger loosened, and the white arrow immediately left the bowstring. Kai! The white arrow penetrated through the air and straight to the black figure's head. Its speed was so fast that the naked eye could not catch it. In a moment ago, it had just left the bowstring, but in the next moment, it had already surpassed the fire-red huge tiger that was formed by the Xuan Yuan sword. It was not even 2 meters away from the black figure, and an extremely sharp aura completely enveloped it. Roar! The black figure let out a low roar like that of a wild beast, and the moment it turned around, a white light slashed down towards the arrow diagonally. It was extremely fierce, and wherever the white light passed, the space seemed to be split in half. The surging waves of strength chi could be clearly seen. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! In the blink of an eye, an earth-shattering sound was heard. The arrow had disappeared without a trace, but in the instant it collided with the arrow, the explosive power it released was violent to the extreme. In an instant, a violent storm seemed to have arisen within a radius of 10 meters out of nowhere. The black shadow was like a kite with a broken string as it uncontrollably flew backwards. Before he could stabilize his body, the fire-red huge tiger that was in the form of a Xuan Yuan sword had already pounced on him. The white light in the black shadow's hand danced again, but it did not attack the giant tiger. Instead, it streaked past in front of him like lightning. In an instant, a thick white barrier appeared. Bam! The white barrier did not even last for a single breath before it exploded with a loud bang. The fire-red huge tiger's claw had even struck the black figure's chest with lightning speed. Ooh! It was actually an abnormally skinny old man. His body was covered with a black robe, and his entire face did not even have a single piece of flesh on it. He looked like a skeleton wearing human skin, which was quite terrifying. In the black costume old man's hand was a long and thin bone sword. With a stuffy groan, black costume old man spat out a mouthful of fresh blood. He agilely somersaulted back up and continued to flee. However, before he even rushed out another meter, a figure flashed and appeared in front of him on the left. It was Tang Huan, with one hand holding the bow and the other holding the sword. Mockery had appeared in his dark eyes. Secluded Night Divine Palace Master Tang Huan, I have underestimated you. Black costume old man had no choice but to stop in his tracks. With a cold tone, his sunken eyes flashed with a dark light like 2 poisonous snakes. Tang Huan laughed sarcastically. You overestimate yourself. This palace master's concealing technique was indeed superb. Previously, when Tang Huan had investigated him that way, she had not been able to sense his aura. Even when Tang Huan had collected the pile of Saint-grade gem, he had not been moved in the slightest. It was only when he started to collect the initial spirit heavenly crystal that Tang Huan finally sensed a trace of unusual aura fluctuations. You're right, I am indeed overestimating myself. That black costume old man's expression was gloomy as he said coldly, Foggy Sea Island has only produced so little initial spirit heavenly crystal after so many years. I normally would be reluctant to use them, but I can only watch as they fell into your hands. However, do you think you can put me to death by forcing me to show myself? When he finished speaking, the black costume old man suddenly laughed out loud. Almost at the same time his voice fell, his body actually split into 5. As 3 figures turned and rushed towards the stairs, while the other 2 rushed to the left and right of Tang Huan, aiming at the passage behind Tang Huan. Chapter 669. You're too naive. There's quite a bit of embodiment behind it, Tang Huan scoffed, and in a blink of an eye, the Xuan Yuan sword and the exquisite carving bow had left their hands and transformed into a fire-red huge tiger and a gigantic white condor, respectively, rushing towards the two figures on the stairs. Remoteness Dragon King, who had been guarding the teleportation circle, was the third figure to be affected. As for the two figures charging towards the passageway, the resounding dragon's roar resounded throughout the White Skeleton's palace once again. In the time of Tang Huan's mind instructs, in a second, the dragon slaughtering saber had already separated from its body, transforming into a dazzling long dragon, and pounced towards the figure on the left. However, Tang Huan's figure flashed, and directly blocked the path of the black figure on the right. This was his true form. 4 pieces of divine armament and Tang Huan just so happened to correspond to the skinny old man's 4 embodiment and his original body. The 4 divine armament who possess artifact spirits. Tang Huan, you can actually control 4 divine armaments at the same time? The skinny old man's footsteps paused. He could no longer suppress the shock in his heart as he cried out in horror. What caused him to be even more shocked was that among the 4 divine armaments, the aura that each of them gave off was exceptionally terrifying. The divine armament was also a weapon. Since it was in the hands of its owner, only then would it be able to display its full power. Tang Huan's 4 divine armaments had all distanced themselves from Tang Huan and turned into artifact spirits. But even so, with the artifact spirit's strength, it was not a problem to fight against one of his embodiment. Therefore, people can't be too greedy. Tang Huan's eyes flashed with ridicule. If you had escaped through the teleportation magic array from the very beginning and then scattered with your embodiment, no matter how many divine armament I have, I wouldn't have been able to do anything to you. But now, you can only wait for me to take care of you all in one fell swoop. Although he could fuse with multiple divine armaments, there was still a limit. With his current strength, even if there was a 9-yang divine furnace in the dungeon, he could only fuse 4 at most. This was because every time a divine armament was fused, it would create an enormous burden on the soul. And these 4 sets of divine armaments were already the maximum that Tang Huan's soul could bear right now. In addition, after the divine armament left his hand, the furthest Tang Huan could control couldn't be beyond the range that the heavenly domain would extend to when he was at his peak. This meant that no matter if it was Conqueror Spear, Xuan Yuan sword, or dragon slaughtering saber, the range of movement of their artifact spirits would be around 100 meters. If this secluded night divine palace master had escaped from this White Skeleton's palace a long time ago, Tang Huan would at most be able to chase up to one of his bodies. Fortunately, this fellow couldn't bear to part with his initial spirit heavenly crystal apostrophe, so he hid within this palace. Tang Huan, do you really think I only have 4 embodiments? To tell you the truth, before you arrived here, this reputed one's 3 embodiments had already left. The skinny old man's eyes were dark. The moment he finished speaking, the golden dragon transformed from the dragon slaughtering saber had already knocked into one of his embodiment, and immediately after, the fire-red huge tiger and white eagle had also become entangled with each other, leaving behind 2 black figures which were quickly approaching the 8 Remoteness Dragon King transformed by the Conqueror's spear. Old man, you are too naive. Even if you have 10 embodiments, what can you do? Tang Huan laughed coldly. If you kill your original body, your embodiment would no longer be able to increase. What kind of waves can you create in the future? When the Hall Master of the secluded Night Divine Palace had separated out the 4 embodiment, Tang Huan had already expected that this fellow, just in case, would very likely have already let several embodiments escape. However, he didn't mind. He just needed to capture this guy alive in a bit, and then he would be able to find the embodiments one by one according to his soul. Of course, Tang Huan didn't reveal this point at the moment, in case this guy completely destroyed his own body and the surrounding 4 embodiments' souls. The skinny old man remained silent. Obviously what Tang Huan had said was the truth. Within every embodiment, there would be a portion of his soul that would be separated. Although his embodiment would not disappear with his main body, because of his soul being incomplete, not only was it impossible for his embodiment to continue to increase, it would even gradually decrease. Most importantly, after this foggy sea island was exposed, there would no longer be any place left to hide in the secluded night divine palace. Suddenly, the skinny old man groaned. The embodiment on the side was slapped down by the golden dragon that was made from dragon slaughtering saber. In an instant, he disappeared without a trace, leaving only his black robe. Tang Huan reached out and grabbed, and the golden dragon's body quickly shrank, transforming back into a dragon slaughtering saber and entering into the palm of his hand. The skinny old man's face twitched, and he said with a gloomy voice, "Tang Huan, although I have sent people to assassinate you, it was only a deal. I have no grudges with you. If you are willing to let me go, I can give you enough compensation. You have no enmity with me?" Hearing his words, Tang Huan couldn't help but laugh. "Old fellow, I forgot to tell you one thing. Glory Sacred Temple's current master, Shan Shan, is my wife." "Shan Shan?" The skinny old man's pupils constricted. He obviously knew that he no longer had any leeway left today and shouted in a shrill voice, "Tang Huan, I'll kill you." The moment he finished speaking, the bone sword in his hand had already swept up the cold and gloomy strength chi and whizzed forward. However, under the five colors heavenly domain's suppression, although his attack looked crazy and terrifying, the power seemed to have been greatly reduced. Tang Huan's gaze turned cold, and the dragon slaughtering saber in his hand immediately burst forth with an exceptionally dazzling golden light. Ho! The huge saber spun around rapidly, and the golden dragon on the back of the blade seemed to come to life. A terrifying blade light surged out, and in a blink of an eye, it had already condensed into a huge golden dragon head. Under the powerful firepower of the sharp spiritual fire, there were even wisps of white flame rising from within the dragon head. Its sharpness surged, as if a mountain in front of it could be knocked out with a huge hole. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! In the blink of an eye, a loud sound was heard. The golden dragon head exploded, the incomparably sharp power wreaking havoc everywhere, and in that moment, the gloomy chi released by the bone sword shattered, while Tang Huan moved like a shadow. The dragon slaughtering saber in his hands destroyed the strength chi in front of him and struck the white bone sword. Pachi! Clang! With an ear-piercing collision sound, the great power surged. The skinny old man couldn't hold on any longer and the bone sword in his hand immediately fell to the ground, turning into countless pieces. Tang Huan's attack was not the least bit slow. After the dragon slaughtering saber suddenly jumped high in the air like a spring, it actually came crashing down with a violent momentum, like a huge mountain had collapsed. The boundless and vast strength chi seemed to solidify as it poured down from the sky like a waterfall. The skinny old man felt as if his body was about to be torn to pieces, his eyes flashing with extreme terror. The thin old man could no longer avoid the blade attack as his skinny arms began to inflate like balloons, blocking the incoming attack. The skin on his arms, which were originally like dried bark, was now glowing with a metallic luster. Chapter 670, Discovery. Bam! The huge force landed on the old man's arms. Crack! With the sound of bones breaking, the old man's arms shriveled up at a speed that could be seen with the naked eye. A mournful howl of pain sounded out at almost the same time, and the old man's facial features began to twist, making his originally hideous face seem all the more terrifying. However, the obstruction of his two arms helped him gain a bit of time, and almost the same time that his two arms broke, his body flew out, and barely dodged Tang Huan's dragon slaughtering saber, but his two arms were already by his side, and fresh blood flowed out. However, he had only retreated less than a meter when the tyrannical pressure engulfed him from all directions, causing his speed to plummet. Ho! An instant later, the dragon slaughtering saber had already swept across. The skinny old man's eyes were filled with panic, but he did not have time to react as the broad body of the blade had already landed on his waist. A powerful force burst out from the blade, causing the entire world to tremble. Ooh! With a blood-curdling screech, The old man was sent flying like he had been defeated. Without waiting for his body to fall to the ground, Tang Huan's body shot forward like a bolt of lightning, his hand grabbing onto the skull of the that was like a skull. Following that, the 5 colors heavenly domain that covered the entire white skeleton's palace began to shrink rapidly, the force of the pressure increasing by a large extent. Dang! The skinny old man opened his mouth, but before he could finish, the vigorous genuine qi had already poured down from Tang Huan's palm, resonating with the power of the heavenly domain and completely locking his body down. At this time, the fear in his eyes had turned into despair. Tang Huan showed no mercy at all as a condensed 5 colors odor immediately shot out from between his eyebrows. It was as thin as a needle and it pierced the old man's forehead as fast as lightning. This was the soul-killing stab. For the time being, Tang Huan had only learned one of the several soul attack techniques recorded within the Soul Method True Explanation. Fortunately, Tang Huan was not only a martial warrior, he was also a mage. To magi, training in this method gave them a huge advantage. Otherwise, under today's circumstances, Tang Huan might not even be able to unleash the soul-killing stab. If the Hall Master of the Secluded Night Divine Palace did not separate those embodiment, her strength should already be quite close to the Demon Lord Fen Tian that she met Tang Huan for the first time. However, after separating the embodiment, he only had the strength of the peak stage 9, and was much weaker than Xing Meng. However, Tang Huan still had to keep him alive. Therefore, Tang Huan had to inflict maximum damage to his soul the instant she controlled him. It would be best if his soul fell into a deep sleep to prevent him from burning his soul to commit suicide. Such a method could not be used by ordinary stage 9 rankers, but the Secluded Night Divine Palace's Palace Master was definitely an exception. If he died just like this, Tang Huan would have to rely on the embodiment inside this palace hall to find those that he escaped with long ago. But in this way, he would definitely expend even more effort. After all, embodiment's soul could not compare to the main body's soul. To be able to sense the soul of a embodiment through the soul of the main body, the position must be extremely clear. It was a good thing that there was this soul-killing stab, otherwise, Tang Huan really wouldn't have any other way. After that moment, the skinny old man let out a groan as pain appeared on his face. His sunken eyes first bulged out, but soon after, he closed his eyes, as if he was in deep sleep. Tang Huan sensed carefully and let out a light sigh as if a heavy burden had been lifted, following which, Tang Huan looked inside the white skeleton's palace. They were already at a disadvantage, and were in a precarious situation. Now, they did not have the slightest bit of resistance, and in the blink of an eye, the 3 embodiments were killed. With just a thought, Tang Huan caused 8 Remoteness Dragon King, Fire Red Huge Tiger and the White Eagle to fly over at the same time, transforming into Conqueror Spear S, Xoani Yuan Sword S, and Exquisite Carving Bow S, fusing together. Yeah! Now that the white skeleton's palace was no longer a threat, Zhao Budian jumped down from Tang Huan's shoulder and started to wander around. Tang Huan's attention was completely focused on the skinny old man, and not long after, a ball of white mist appeared in Tang Huan's palm. It was precisely the soul of the Secluded Night Divine Palace's Palace Master, and the aura it emitted was not only extremely weak, it was also extremely unstable. He was not like Tang Huan, who had a strong and stable soul, who could even withstand the stronger soul-killing storm of the Demon Lord Fen Tian. The soul-killing stab Tang Huan had just used caused his soul to suffer heavy injuries. This also made Tang Huan rejoice inwardly. It was fortunate that he had not used all of his soul-killing stab, otherwise, his soul might have already completely collapsed. Without any hesitation, Tang Huan immediately used the heart-twining and soul-searching method on him. As expected, there are still 2 more embodiment left to escape. However, we may not be out of the island yet. There's still time to intercept them. Tang Huan frowned, and shouted, Zhao Budian. Yeah! Inside the skull at the top of the stairs, Zhao Budian's body was revealed. She was actually waving her 2 little claws at Tang Huan in excitement. The little guy seemed to have discovered something. Tang Huan was suspicious, but after that, he moved and flew over. Previously, Tang Huan had hacked apart the gigantic throne with a swing of his sword, but the skeleton on the chair was still undamaged. At that time, Tang Huan had only wanted to stop the secluded Night Divine Palace's Hallmaster. Although he was surprised, he did not pay too much attention to it. He was from the Heavenly Domain level expert, so how powerful was the sword, to not be able to injure that skeleton in the slightest? When Tang Huan arrived in front of the skeleton, Zhao Budian jumped out from within the eye sockets, flapped his 4 pairs of wings and flew towards Tang Huan, 2 little claws holding onto a round object, white as snow, crystal clear, like stone yet not stone, like jade yet not jade, approximately the size of a fist. The chi that was being emitted was exactly the same as the skeleton. This was the reason why Tang Huan did not sense its existence before this. Yeah. Zhao Budian presented the white item in front of Tang Huan like a treasure. He looked extremely pleased with himself. What is this? Tang Huan took it and flipped it over and over again, the dot in his eyes becoming stronger. Tang Huan was not sure what exactly it was, but he was sure that it existed within the Palace Master's memories. As long as he conducted the heart-twining and soul-searching method on his soul again later, he would definitely be able to find the answer. The most important thing right now was to find his last 2 embodiment. With a thought, Tang Huan kept the white ball back into the Sumeru magical ring, and then his gaze landed on the continuously fluctuating wall behind the skeleton. Chapter 671, Ling Zhao Arch. Ho! After a short while, Tang Huan's figure was revealed within a deep ravine. Within the violently churning clouds, the silhouettes of numerous skeletons could be vaguely seen. Without even waiting for the skeletons to approach, a pair of wings had already condensed on Tang Huan's back. Soon after, the hissing sound started. Tang Huan's wings started to flap, he soared into the sky, and in a moment, he was out of the clouds, floating in the sky. In his line of sight, everything was bright and clear. With a sweep of his gaze, Tang Huan determined that he was probably in the southwest sky of Foggy Sea Island. The teleportation array allowed him to travel from the southeast to the southwest, as they covered almost the entire island. In a moment of thought, Tang Huan had already calmed his mind and focused his attention on the cluster of soul in his palm. Not long after, Tang Huan exclaimed in surprise. According to the memories he had obtained from the soul of the secluded Night Divine Palace's Hallmaster, after his 2 embodiment left the White Skeleton's palace, one would head out to sea, while the other would hide in the Foggy Sea Island. However, from the situation he had sensed just now, those 2 embodiments had actually gone to the center of the Foggy Sea Island. After the secluded Night Divine Palace's Palace Master's true body was discovered, did the 2 embodiment temporarily change their minds? But what were they doing there? It's better to be at the center of Foggy Sea Island than to escape from the sea. In the next moment, Tang Huan retracted his spirit power and rushed to the center of the Foggy Sea Island. Seemingly at the same time, Tang Huan also used the connection between his souls to pass a mind instructs, in a second, to Feng Ming, who was guarding the northern side of Foggy Sea Island, allowing her and Zhai to approach him. In the center of the island, the fog was getting thicker. Looking down from above, it seemed to have congealed into a large mass of substance. Even though it was floating in the air, one could clearly feel an even stronger pressure surrounding it. After waiting in the sky for a while, a red figure appeared in the northern horizon. It was Feng Ming. In a moment, she was in front of Tang Huan. The little white rabbit was squatting on her shoulder, and its spirit had improved a lot. There are still 2 embodiments that escaped the net, right below us. Without waiting for Feng Ming to speak, Tang Huan let out a low shout, and the 5 colors heavenly domain spread out again, enveloping Feng Ming and Zhai within, and then began to sink down. While he was moving around the island, the pressure from the clouds didn't affect Tang Huan much. Even if he didn't activate the heavenly domain, he could move freely. But in the center area, after entering the clouds, even with Tang Huan's strength, he would need to use the heavenly domain to resist the clouds. In an instant, the consumption rate of Tang Huan's genuine qi greatly increased. Given the strength of the 2 embodiment masters of the secluded Night Divine Palace, They shouldn't be able to stay in this place for too long. However, they stayed below and didn't move at all. While thinking, Tang Huan and Feng Ming had already landed on the ground. The two of them looked at each other in astonishment. In the other regions, almost as soon as they appeared, they could see a large number of skeletons, but they couldn't even see a shadow of a skeleton. Could it be that not even the Stage 9 skeletons could withstand the strong pressure in the middle of Foggy Sea Island? With just a thought, Tang Huan had already retracted his mind, and followed the guidance of his soul, and sped forward. Not long later, everything became clear in front of Tang Huan's eyes. At this moment, what appeared in Tang Huan's line of sight was around flat land, with a radius of several thousand meters. On the ground, it seemed as though there was an unusually large stone board, sparkling untranslucent, like beautiful jade. And in the center of this flat ground, stood an incomparably huge arched door that was several hundred meters tall, as though it was formed from a curved, long, round stone strip. Around the arena, there was a circle of enormous stone pillars that was 100 meters tall. There were actually 81 of them. Slate, stone arch, stone pillar. It was simple, but it emitted a majestic and unparalleled aura. When people saw it, they couldn't help but feel insignificant. Not only that, the huge stone slab on the ground, as well as the stone arch and the stone pillar, all contained extremely complicated patterns. Not only that, the huge stone board on the ground, as well as the stone arch and the stone pillar, all contained extremely complicated patterns. Yeah, Gugu, Zhao and Zhao Butian called out in surprise. Tang Huan and Feng Ming could not help but look at each other. They could see an unconcealable sense of bewilderment from each other's eyes. They never thought that there was actually such a bizarre place in the center of Foggy Sea Island. However, with the pressure from the fog in the area, even peak Stage 9 rankers would not necessarily be able to reach this place. It was no wonder that the situation here never spread out. What is this place? Feng Ming could not help but mutter. I don't know. Just as Tang Huan shook his head, a flash of inspiration flashed through his mind and he exclaimed, could this be the Lingzhou Arch? That Lingzhou Arch appeared once every 10 years, but it was impossible for it to appear for no reason. After all, the Lingzhou Arch was connected to the Lingzhou Ancient Road, and the Lingzhou Ancient Road was connected to the Forging God Great World. This strange object was not a rootless duckweed in the wind. It must have had a very powerful carrying object. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for it to open that passage. This was the same logic as the teleportation array. Whether it was engraved inside the magic bee door on the wall, each magic array had its own carrying object. Teleportation arrays couldn't be drawn in the air. It was the same for Lingzhou Arch and Lingzhou Ancient Road. Furthermore, the strength required to activate them must have reached an extremely terrifying level. It was possible that the fog in the entire Foggy Sea Island was prepared to activate Lingzhou Arch and Lingzhou Ancient Road. The more Tang Huan thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. Lingzhou Arch. Hearing Tang Huan's guess, Feng Ming was first surprised, but then she nodded as if thinking of something that might be possible. However, even if it was really the Lingzhou Arch, it was still a dead object that had not been activated yet. What was that fellow trying to do with his two embodiment? Aren't they afraid that you'll find them? Let's go in and take a look. Tang Huan unwittingly smiled. What Feng Ming asked was exactly what he was wondering. Ordinary peak Stage 9 rankers would not be able to reach here, but he was able to kill the heavenly domain level expertess. It was impossible for the two embodiments of that old fellow to not know of this point. Yet they still ran over. According to the soul's guidance, those two embodiments should be in the arena in front of them. However, in Tang Huan's line of sight, they were not there, but were probably blocked by a certain stone pillar. Chapter 672, Black Skeleton. The two figures quickly moved forward, quickly stepping onto the incomparably vast stone slab. In the next moment, Tang Huan felt relaxed. Within the area of the stone slab, the terrifying pressure produced by the clouds was actually completely isolated from the world. Inside the stone board, not to mention Feng Ming, the peak Stage 9 ranker, even Zhao Butian could move freely here. Tang Huan thought for a while, Then the 5 colors heavenly domain disappeared. As expected, there was no longer any feeling of oppression, and what replaced it was an incomparably rich aura of power. This kind of power shared the same origin as the power in the surrounding clouds. In this area, this power did not bring any pressure, but it was a few times purer compared to the surrounding clouds. This kind of power could be completely absorbed and refined. If one cultivated here, the speed of their cultivation would definitely be faster than the 3rd level of the Sky Spirit Realm. Giving a meaningful glance at Feng Ming, Tang Huan composed himself and quietly advanced forward. Yeah? But after walking for only a few dozen meters, on Tang Huan's shoulder, Zhao Budian began to let out a low cry, and her chubby little butt began to twist back and forth, as though she was extremely uneasy. Tang Huan raised his eyebrows. He could not help but let out a trace of warning in the bottom of his heart, and the more he moved forward, the more obvious this bad feeling became. However, Tang Huan was unable to grasp where this feeling came from. The 2 embodiment of the secluded Night Divine Palace's Palace Master. Tang Huan quietly slowed down his footsteps. This thought subconsciously flashed through his mind, but in the next moment, Tang Huan had already rejected it. Those 2 embodiment were equivalent to 2 Stage 9 Martial Saints, and basically could not bring him any threat, nor would Zhao Budian feel any danger. Goo goo. Immediately after, Zhao Ai released a soft cry, obviously sensing it as well. Feng Ming frowned. She felt that something was wrong with the situation between Zhao Budian and her, as well as the change in Tang Huan's expression. Moreover, this place made her feel even more pressured. Tang Huan squinted as he appeared once again in the midst of mind instructs. In a second, the perception ability had been raised to the extreme in an instant. Woo-yoo-yoo-yoo. A low roar suddenly sounded, as if an ancient beast had suddenly awakened from its slumber. The roar actually became louder and louder. At first, it was rather soft, but after a few breaths of time, the roar was like thunder, seemingly capable of tearing one's eardrums. Accompanying this roar was an exceptionally terrifying aura fluctuation. Wherever it passed, space seemed to surge crazily. Tang Huan's heart skipped a beat. He felt his scalp go numb. The 2 embodiment of the secluded Night Divine Palace's Palace Master were right behind the arch, but there were not only them at that place, there was also a hidden expert of astonishing strength. The moment he sensed that aura fluctuation, even Tang Huan's soul had been shaken. Before, Tang Huan had only felt an aura of this degree from one person. It was the first sword form of the sword seal left behind by the Lingzhou sword sect peerless expert. The strength of the person in front was not one bit inferior to Jian Yi. Tang Huan's mind trembled, and said anxiously, Feng Ming, Zhao Budian, you 2 enter the space aircraft. Zhao Ai will help me outside. Without the slightest hesitation, with a slight thought from Tang Huan, the flying shuttle flew out quickly from his embrace, and started to fluctuate rapidly in the air. Feng Ming had also realized the seriousness of the situation. If she had stayed outside, it would have caused Tang Huan to be distracted. Be careful. He only had enough time to give a concerned reminder before the flying shuttle sucking entered Feng Ming's body. Zhao Budian also cried out "Yeah" and "Yeah" twice, following closely behind him as he entered the aircraft. Let's go. Keeping the flying shuttle, Tang Huan slightly nodded towards Zhao Ai, who was on his shoulder, and walked forward with large strides. The Conqueror Spear appeared in his hands at almost the same time and turned into a Tremotinous Dragon King. His mouth opened, and secluded Night Divine Palace Lord Soul swallowed it, reverting back to the appearance of a Conqueror Spear. At this moment, Tang Huan was feeling slightly regretful in his heart. Inside the soul of the secluded Night Divine Palace's Palace Master, there was definitely something about this place. Unfortunately, when Tang Huan was at White Skeleton's palace, she was anxious to find his 2 embodiment, so after determining that he was not lying, she immediately set off to chase after him. If he had spent more time searching through all of his memories, he would have known about this place by now. However, at this point, it was useless to regret. Woo-yoo-yoo-yoo. The wailing sound was like a clap of thunder, resounding through the air once more. Like a hurricane, The aura coming from the arched door grew increasingly stronger. Almost as soon as the roar was heard, the sound of footsteps could be heard. The sound was low and deep, but it seemed to pierce through everyone's hearts. When Tang Huan was only a few hundred meters away from the arched door, a black figure walked out from behind it. The only difference was that the skeleton was as white as jade, and the skeleton's entire body was as black as ink. When it appeared, the surrounding light seemed to be absorbed by the sucking, becoming dimmer and dimmer. Behind the skeleton were two black figures. They were two old men. Embodiment? The aura exuded by the two old men was exactly the same as that of the secluded Night Divine Palace's hallmaster. They were obviously the two embodiments that Tang Huan was looking for. As for the black skeleton, when it looked at it, Tang Huan's pupils couldn't help but constrict and his expression became extremely serious. Goo! The little white rabbit opened its mouth and roared. The deafening sound waves seemed to have solidified into a solid substance that rippled crazily in the entire region. At the same time it roared, the aura emitted from its body also started to churn violently, like raging waves in the stormy seas. Tang Huan, I never thought that you would actually come here. You are simply seeking your own death. The moment they saw Tang Huan, an embodiment behind the skeleton began to laugh loudly. Tang Huan, you're dead today. The other embodiment also laughed sinisterly. Just based on this skeleton? Tang Huan laughed coldly, and pouted his lips in disdain. The appearance of this black skeleton gave him an even greater pressure. This gave him a premonition that even if he worked together with Zhao Ai, he still might not be able to defeat it. However, this did not mean that he would be afraid. But after a moment, Tang Huan was slightly stunned, and the black skeleton actually spoke. Tang Huan. Inside the skull, a group of blood-red odor the size of a wash basin was jumping around like flames. A low and cold voice shook the skull. To be able to came to this place, your strength is pretty good. However, this foggy sea island is this king's residence, so you can't act recklessly here. Chapter 673, Conqueror Breaching Army Spear Technique. The skeleton could actually speak. After a brief moment of surprise, Tang Huan began to laugh loudly. A mere skeleton dares to call itself king. How laughable. The skeleton let out an angry snort and a black aura rose from its bones. A wave of terrifying killing intent swept towards Tang Huan and Zhao Ai like raging waves and billowing waves, and the space it passed through seemed to solidify. The shocking aura seemed to want to grind the obstacles in front of it into fine powder. Tang Huan, how dare you be disrespectful to secluded Night Dark King? How dare you? Almost at the same time, the two embodiments aspirated at the same time. Tang Huan, you deserve to die. The black skeleton, who was referred to as secluded Night Dark King, clawed at his chest and actually pulled out a long rib. In the next instant, he was like a ferocious beast that had escaped its cage as he charged forward like lightning, the black aura seemingly coalescing into a protective barrier around his body. So fast. Just a moment ago, it was still several hundred meters away, but in the next moment, the distance between it and Tang Huan had already shrunk to less than 100 meters. What made Tang Huan feel even more apprehensive was not its speed, but its heavenly domain. The skeleton's heavenly domain had actually shrunk even more than his own 5 colors heavenly domain. It was as if there was a thin layer of skin that completely adhered to the surface of his body. Zhao Ai, get rid of those two embodiments. Amidst the explosive shout, Tang Huan had already shot forward like lightning. At this moment, he had already activated both 9 Yang Divine Furnace and 5 Colors Spiritual Pills to their limits. A blazing firepower mixed with a majestic genuine chi surged out violently, and the Conqueror's spear in his hands immediately released an incomparably dazzling red light. A terrifying heat also surged out from within the spear, spiraling rapidly along the spear's force. Goo! At about the same time, Zhao Ai also jumped up from Tang Huan's shoulder like an arrow that had just left the bow, and actually flew up hundreds of meters into the sky. Before even the blink of an eye, that small group of white shadows had already flew across the sky above secluded Night Dark King like a meteor as it smashed towards the two embodiments behind him. Seeing this, the two embodiments were shocked. and practically shot forward without hesitation. Although it was their first time meeting Zhai, the aura Zhai emitted made them understand that this was an opponent that even their main bodies could not defeat. Whether it was escaping or resisting, death was inevitable. Only by getting close to the secluded Night Dark King would there be a chance for survival. Howl. Sensing Zhai's actions, the secluded Night Dark King roared. He did not turn around to stop him, but instead, continued to rush at Tang Huan, the rib in his hand extended out with the force of a thunderbolt, and a gigantic ray of black light whizzed out from the rib, instantly tearing through the air and sweeping towards Tang Huan. Swish! Tang Huan's spear was like a dragon, thrusting out with an astonishing speed. In the blink of an eye, Tang Huan had already thrust it out 49 times. Streaks of fiery red spear shadows rapidly condensed in the air, instantly transforming into an incomparably large spear light, and roared forward. Even the air itself seemed to have been punctured by a gigantic hole. This was the first style of the Conqueror Breaching Army spear technique, Divine Power Beating. Before Shen Shan left the Heavenly Forging City, he returned the Divine Armaments battle skill to Tang Huan. Coincidentally, in that book, there was the Conqueror Breaching Army spear technique that was called the first spear technique. With Tang Huan's heavenly domain level of strength, cultivating this kind of spear technique shouldn't be too difficult. Tang Huan was already familiar with the 4 forms of the spear technique. This Conqueror Breaching Army spear technique was originally a set of spear techniques that was created for the Conqueror spear. Now, when Tang Huan used the Divine Power Beating with the Conqueror spear, he was actually able to unleash this kind of spear technique to the fullest. In a split second, that bundle of fire-red spear radiance and that streak of black light fiercely clashed. With an earth-shattering explosion, both of them burst apart at the same time, and the incomparably violent strength chi surged out in all directions like a wave. At this time, secluded Night Dark King and Tang Huan's footsteps did not pause at all, and in the blink of an eye, they had already crashed into the rapidly raging strength chi. Ho! The ribs in secluded Night Dark King's hand chopped towards Tang Huan once again. The black heavenly domain on the surface of his body fluctuated violently and gathered towards the ribs like flowing water. Tang Huan didn't hesitate at all as he slashed the spear in his hand with lightning speed. The powerful 5 colors heavenly domain power also quickly gathered on the spear. Bam! In the blink of an eye, the rib cage that was as black as ink collided with a fire-red long spear that was wrapped in the multicolored intent. An enormous power instantly exploded out, and the air around the point of impact started to ripple abnormally clearly. The sound that seemed to pierce through golden split stone was accompanied by a terrifying impact force as it rumbled in all directions, like a monstrous wave, shocking everyone. In the blink of an eye, it had already passed through the Conqueror's spear and entered his body through its body. Tang Huan did not hesitate at all. The 9-yang divine furnace continued to circulate its energy crazily, absorbing the energy into his body. Even so, Tang Huan felt a sharp pain in his palms, his arms were numb, the spiritual meridian in his body was swollen and the Conqueror's spear almost fell out of his hands. This black skeleton is so strong. Seemingly at the same time as this thought flashed through Tang Huan's mind, the charging force had already roared towards him. Tap, 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 tap. Tang Huan retreated a few steps before he managed to stabilize his body, but secluded Night Dark King only retreated 2 steps, before his sturdy body managed to stabilize itself. Judging from the current situation, the black skeleton was clearly superior. After the first strike, Tang Huan could not help but be secretly shocked. He had long known that this secluded Night Dark King was extremely tyrannical, but the power he had just displayed had far exceeded Tang Huan's expectations. Ever since he had truly stepped into the path of cultivation at the age of 16, Tang Huan had experienced countless battles and entered into many dangerous situations. However, even the great battle with Chu Feng on the walls of the Dragon Spring town was not as dangerous as today. Facing the black skeleton, he even felt the threat of death. However, not only did Tang Huan not have the slightest intention to retreat, there was instead the burning fighting intent in his chest, which rapidly rose. Behind secluded Night Dark King, two miserable wails resounded at almost the same time. It was the two embodiments of the secluded Night Divine Palace's palace master, which had already been killed by Zhao and had their bodies dissipated into nothingness. Just by looking at the names Secluded Night Divine Palace and Secluded Night Dark King, one could tell that the relationship between the two was shallow, and the two embodiments that chose to come here in the end could also be seen that this black skeleton was most likely their backer. Unfortunately, this black skeleton did not take their life and death to heart at all. Woo-yoo-yoo-yoo. In the midst of the roar, the secluded Night Dark King didn't even turn his head back as he once again brandished his dark and serene ribs and fiercely pounced towards Tang Huan. Chapter 674, Overlord Decision. Ho! In the midst of the ear-piercing whistling sound, a dense black aura surged out from that rib, and in an instant, it condensed into an extremely large skull. That widely open mouth was like a black hole, and even if it was a huge mountain in front of it, it seemed to be able to swallow it in one gulp. Seeing that, Tang Huan raised his eyebrows slightly. Not only was this secluded Night Dark King tyrannical, the rib he used as a weapon was also abnormally sturdy. A normal weapon, even the best of holy ranked weapons, would have been destroyed by Tang Huan's spear. However, that rib was not damaged in the slightest when it collided with a conqueror's spear. Kai. In the next moment, the long spear in Tang Huan's hand was brandished, and his power surged out like a ferocious wave, mixing with the heat as it rolled out. In an instant, a fire-red huge dragon followed the spear's might and roared, and wherever it went, the space around it erupted with a series of loud popping sounds. The second movement of Conqueror Breaching Army Spear Technique, Soaring Dragon Break. Both sides' attacks were ferocious, and in the blink of an eye, the fire-red huge dragon had already entered the skull's gaping mouth. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom. The dragon head had already exploded, setting off an incomparably fierce fiery storm within the skull. It then pulled the entire body of the dragon into it, and even more violent power erupted. The skull's surface immediately revealed several fiery red cracks, as if it would break into pieces at any moment. However, the skull stabilized itself. After a slight pause, it continued to shoot towards Tang Huan. This time, the attack from the Dark Night King was even stronger than before. Kai. Tang Huan's eyes became serious. The long spear in his hand became like lightning. A group of fiery red spear lights shot out and struck the skull. Bam! The sound of an explosion rang out and the skull could no longer hold on, shattering into countless bits and pieces. But at this moment, the ribcage in secluded Night Dark King's hands fell from the sky with the force of 10,000 kilograms. The terrifying strength chi poured down like a waterfall. Tang Huan completely didn't have time to change the force of the spear as he cried out explosively. The genuine chi roared out from his arms and poured into the spear body, and in an instant, the conqueror's spear gave off an even more dazzling red glow. On the spearhead, an abnormally fierce flame rose, and the surrounding temperature actually crazily increased. Goo! Almost at the same time, a thunderous roar sounded out. Behind secluded Night Dark King, Zhao Ai, who had eliminated the two embodiments, looked like a ball of white light as he shot forward like lightning. Howl! The secluded Night Dark King roared, the rib in his right hand smashed onto the conqueror's spear, while his left hand took out another rib from his body, and with the back of his hand he pierced towards the little white rabbit behind him. His attack was as fast as lightning, at the same time striking towards Tang Huan and Zhao Ai. His speed was not affected in the slightest. Clang! The long spear and the ribs ruthlessly collided, and a surge of immense strength gushed through the body of the spear. This time, Tang Huan was prepared. The genuine chi blocked it heavily, but the force still managed to enter his body. Although it was eventually lured into the Nine Yang Divine Furnace, Tang Huan's body was forced to retreat once again. As pain surged through his body, his arm felt extremely sore, and even the skin on his palm was split open due to the impact. At this moment, Tang Huan was not alarmed, but instead happy. He suddenly realized that under the Nirvana sacred fire burning, extremely fine cracks had appeared on the ribs in secluded Night Dark King's hand. Tang Huan knew that this was definitely not an illusion. However, he was not surprised. The Nirvana sacred fire of the five elements fire was originally a type of yang power that had a strong restraining effect on skeletons. In essence, the skeleton of the secluded Night Dark King was no different from the Xuanming Ghost Kings, savage heavenly corpses, and the vengeful spirits and blood spirits of the Sword Crafting Valley. The only difference was that its strength far surpassed Xuanming Ghost Kings and savage heavenly corpses, and was vastly different from those vengeful spirits and blood spirits. In a moment, Tang Huan stabilized his footsteps. Right at this moment, another loud explosion occurred. It was secluded Night Dark King's other rib that pierced the white figure that was flying towards them from behind. In the midst of an earth-shattering sound, Zhao instantly retreated several hundred meters, while the secluded Night Dark King's muscular body staggered forward a small step. Wu yu yu yu. Secluded Night Dark King was enraged to the extreme, releasing a heaven-shaking roar. Inside its head, the blood-red odor was surging crazily, and a majestic deathly stillness pervaded the sky and earth. Heavenly Domain, who had adhered to its body like skin, also surged violently, and from a distance, the tall and sturdy skeleton of the secluded Night Dark King seemed to be burning with a layer of black flames. Again, Tang Huan immediately felt an even greater pressure, but his eyes were wide open as he rushed up high in the sky. The Conqueror's spear in his hand smashed down from above. This time, Tang Huan did not make any fancy movements, he just simply shot towards secluded Night Dark King from the top. However, compared to the 2 times he had used Divine Power Beating and Dragon Soaring Break before, the power released from this spear was not weak at all. At this moment, the will within the spear had already reached its peak. An incomparably domineering aura roared out like a torrent. The moment the chi appeared, it merged with the chi that was emitted from Tang Huan's body, and the Conqueror's spear also seemed to have become one with Tang Huan. In this instant, Tang Huan was actually as awe-inspiring as a war god, his domineering aura soaring to the heavens. This was the 3rd form of the Overlord Way among the Conqueror Breaching Army Spear Techniques. Gu. A few hundred meters away, the little white rabbit's eyes were red as she let out a furious roar. Her 2 legs stomped on the ground ferociously as she followed closely behind Tang Huan. Kai. The secluded Night Dark King's right rib swung up diagonally, and a ray of blood light seeped out from inside the head. In an instant, it traveled along the arm and extended to the rib cage, and like a blade ray, it shot out from the rib cage. Under the force of the roiling black chi, it welcomed the Conqueror's spear. The rib in his left hand had also pierced through the underarm. It seemed slow but was actually very weak. On the ribs, there seemed to be an unparalleled power. Clang! In the blink of an eye, the spear and ribs intersected once again as the strength chi rolled forward like a hurricane. Not only did his right rib suddenly sink, even his knees were bent because of it, and his muscular body seemed to have grown 2 meters shorter in an instant. On the other hand, Tang Huan was sent flying dozens of meters back along with his spear. With a thump sound, his 2 feet first landed heavily on the ground, and then his right leg uncontrollably stepped back to stabilize his body. At the same time, Zhao collided ruthlessly with the rib bone in secluded Night Dark King's left hand. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom. Zhao retreated quickly as the secluded Night Dark King staggered forward. Ho! Tang Huan did not stop at all. His body was like a wild horse untamed, rushing forward. The blazing Conqueror's spear swept out with a thunderous power. Chapter 675, Sweeping the Thousand Army. The strength chi and heat emitted by the spear seemed to have turned into a terrifying torrent, rolling towards the spear from afar. Unstoppable, unstoppable. Even if there were thousands of soldiers and horses in front, they could still be crushed to pieces. He had wiped out an army of 1,000. This was the 4th and final move of the Conqueror Breaching Army Spear Technique. Wu yu yu yu. With an exceptionally sharp roar, the ribs on secluded Night Dark King's left hand released a bloody light. In an instant, the black light turned dark red, and then dark red, turning blood red. Kai! The sound of something tearing through the air suddenly rang out. The ribs in secluded Night Dark King's hand were already chopping down towards the left and the sky. From afar, It looked like a blood-red waterfall pouring down from the nine heavens with an imposing manner that overflowed into the sky. A dark, cold and violent aura crazily filled the entire area, and even the air itself was unable to withstand this terrifying fluctuation. Almost at the same time, the cracked rib in its right hand swung behind it. In that direction, the little white rabbit once again brazenly attacked. In a split second, the blood-red waterfall that was split open from its ribs had already fallen onto the fiery torrent that was swept out by the conqueror's spear. The earth-shaking explosion sounds seemed to have congealed into a solid sound wave, which surged in all directions, and the incomparably violent strength chi rolled out in all directions while intertwining with each other, wave after wave, layer upon layer, instantly distorting the space and creating huge ripples. In that instant, the area within a 100-meter radius was enveloped by a terrifying storm, and the terrifying strength chi spread to 1,000 meters radius. Under such a violent impact, the blood-red ribs and the fire-red long spear were separated from each other the moment they came into contact, causing Tang Huan to retreat continuously. Secluded Night Dark King was also unable to resist as he continuously stepped backwards with his large feet. The ribs on his right hand had also unavoidably shifted in direction. However, with Secluded Night Dark King at the front blocking the terrifying impact of the strength chi, Zhao Ai's attack wasn't too affected. Seemingly at the same time as Secluded Night Dark King retreated, the white stream of light released from Zhao Ai's body passed right through his sharp ribs. Its two hind legs ruthlessly stepped on his spine, and the powerful strength chi exploded out of him in an instant. With the strength chi in front and Zhao Ai's legs behind, under the pincer attack, Secluded Night Dark King's body uncontrollably took a few steps forward, then retreated a few steps back again and again. The bones in his entire body shook slightly, and the little white rabbit bounced back a few 100 meters. Woo-yoo-yoo-yoo. The sound of her angry roars filled the air, causing Secluded Night Dark King to be thoroughly infuriated. Inside the head, the blood-red odor was wildly fluctuating as the bloody light spread out like a spider web. In just the blink of an eye, the black skeleton of Secluded Night Dark King had turned completely into a blood-red color. Even the heavenly domain on the surface of his body had been fused with the blood-red light. Whoosh! Tang Huan's body was like a flowing shadow as he once again waved his conqueror spear, pouncing towards Secluded Night Dark King. At the tip of his spear, flames suddenly surged, and the heat was just like a surging tide. On the opposite side, hundreds of meters away, the little white rabbit did not stop either. It once again jumped off the ground and curled its body into a small ball as it charged forward like a meteorite. Boom, boom. Earth-shaking collision sounds rose and fell one after another. Secluded Night Dark King's entire body was filled with killing intent. The two ribs in his hand danced frantically. A blood-red strength chi shot out, welcoming Tang Huan and Zhao Ai's attacks. Tang Huan and Zhao Ai retreated time and time again, but again and again they charged forward. Time passed quietly. After another huge explosion, the little white rabbit flew back and floated onto the ground, baring her teeth as she glared at Secluded Night Dark King's back. At this time, its four limbs were trembling slightly, its mouth was opened wide, and the sound of panting was like lambing. More than 100 meters away, the Secluded Night Dark King's muscular body was also trembling, as though it could fall apart at any time. Inside his head, the group of blood-red odor had already become much dimmer. Tang Huan also breathed heavily like a little white rabbit tens of meters away from the Secluded Night Dark King. Not only were his hands bloodied, the skin on his body was chapped inch by inch, and the blood that was revealed had already dyed the clothes on his body dark red. The situation inside his body was even more terrible. His spiritual meridian and internal organs were all injured, and the energy of the genuine chi, mind power, and even the four great spiritual fire-as had all been used up almost completely. Tang Huan and the little white rabbit attacked Secluded Night Dark King together. However, the majority of the attention of the Secluded Night Dark King was placed on Tang Huan, so every attack that he endured far surpassed the little white rabbit. This Secluded Night Dark King was truly worthy of being the strongest enemy Tang Huan had ever encountered. When fighting against such an enemy, Tang Huan could not hold back at all. The power in his body was gone like water, and his energy replenishment was completely unable to keep up with the speed of his energy consumption. As the battle continued, Tang Huan's energy also gradually bottomed out. In addition to the fact that there was the little white rabbit controlling him from behind, and the 9 Yang Divine Furnaces were constantly gathering power to attack his body. If not for this, Tang Huan would have already lied down. Initially, he had thought that the demon Lord Fen Tian was the #1 expert of this small world, but in the end, he had seen the unfathomably deep sword first, then he had encountered this skeleton in the Foggy Sea Island. The Lingzhou Arch would appear once every 10 years, and when it appeared, all the clouds on the island would dissipate. At that time, any Stage 9 ranker would be able to board the island, but after all these years, no one had discovered the secluded Night Dark King. Even those 4 great blood-red skeletons did not know of its existence. Tang Huan, your strength is indeed far beyond this king's expectations. I didn't think that there would be heavenly domain like you in the 3 clans. However, even though you are able to dominate the 3 races, you are not a match for this king. Secluded Night Dark King suddenly opened his mouth. Tang Huan, it's not easy for this king to cultivate. If you leave Foggy Sea Island just like that, this king can let bygones be bygones. What happened today? This king will treat it as if it never happened. If not, otherwise what? Tang Huan's mouth formed a smile. Otherwise, don't blame this king for leaving you in the Foggy Sea Island. The secluded Night Dark King laughed sinisterly. Of course, killing you like this is too much of a pity. So, this king will spare your life. You have killed that trash Gui Jia. You can just happen to be the top, and become the new Hall Master of Secluded Night Divine Palace. The person behind the Secluded Night Divine Palace is actually you. Tang Huan was a little surprised. Gui Jia was the name of the Secluded Night Divine Palace's palace master. He had long guessed that the relationship between the Secluded Night Dark King and the Night God Codex was very deep. He didn't expect that it was actually the real master who was hiding behind the Secluded Night Divine Palace. Chapter 676, Killing Hands. That's right. Secluded Night Dark King's voice was overcast as he laughed coldly. Tang Huan, you must think carefully about which choice to make. Don't regret it when the time comes. Tang Huan laughed. There's no need to think about it. I really want to see how you will make me regret this. This secluded Night Dark King was hiding within the Foggy Sea Island. Although he looked harmless, he was the main culprit behind the deaths of mountain country and the mountain forests. Gui Jia was just a marionette in his hands. If this guy were to survive, it would be a huge disaster for both the human clan and himself. No matter how heavy the injuries were, Tang Huan had to kill it. After all, the Lingzhou Arch would appear very soon, and Tang Huan couldn't stay in this small world for long. Tang Huan, do you really think this king can't do anything to you and that little bastard? Secluded Night Dark King was furious. Within the head, the group of blood red odor started to undulate more and more violently, but it suddenly shrunk, and the blood red aura that was already fading on the skeleton once again became denser. Gu, Zhao roared out in anger. Like a hedgehog, all the hair on his body stood up. Tang Huan's face congealed. He finally understood what Secluded Night Dark King's trump card was. This huge battle with him and Zhao had consumed a lot of its energy, so its current state was not much better than Tang Huan's. Under normal circumstances, it was indeed powerless to kill him and Zhao, but now, it had burned its own soul in exchange for power. This kind of method was extremely harmful to the user. Once it was used, it would take a very long time to recover. Furthermore, once the energy used up, it would become even weaker. If he were to enter the space aircraft now, he could easily avoid the Secluded Night Dark King, but Zhao would have to take on the powerful attacks from the Secluded Night Dark King in his place. With the distance between him and Zhao, it was impossible to get Zhao into the flying shuttle before the Secluded Night Dark King launched an attack. Even if he were to take Zhao in, this method was not advisable. Seeing Tang Huan and Zhao hiding inside the aircraft, the Secluded Night Dark King could not just foolishly wait here. It would definitely take advantage of its tyrannical strength to escape, and the moment it entered the surrounding clouds and mist, it would be extremely difficult for Tang Huan to activate the flying shuttle and find it. After a moment of hesitation, Tang Huan's eyes became ruthless. Secluded Night Dark King had such a trump card, did he not have it? Ho! In the next moment, from between Tang Huan's brows, a congealed 5 colors odor roared out, and in that moment, it turned into an extremely ferocious storm, sweeping towards Secluded Night Dark King, which seemed to be able to destroy everything, and a terrifying aura surged out crazily. This was the soul-killing storm, a soul attack method that was even more powerful than the soul-killing stab. However, Tang Huan had also been like the demon Lord Fentian back then, and had not truly learned this method. Only, at this time, Tang Huan could not care so much anymore. The other soul attack soul-killing stab that he was familiar with would probably not be able to pose too much of a threat to the Secluded Night Dark King, and this soul-killing storm, even if Tang Huan had not successfully cultivated it, the power it could unleash would still far surpass that of the soul-killing stab. Right now, the Secluded Night Dark King was burning her soul, which was when her soul was at its most unstable state. It was at this time that she launched her soul attack, which had the best effect. Soul attack? Secluded Night Dark King's tone changed greatly as he explosively retreated, the 2 ribs in his hands actually slashing out at the same time. Wherever the red light passed by, the strength chi would turn, as if it wanted to completely shred that 5-colored storm. It was a pity that although the power contained within its 2 ribs was strong, it did not affect Tang Huan's attack. In the blink of an eye, the 5-colored storm had already whistled past, charging straight into Secluded Night Dark King's head, frantically attacking the group of blood red odor inside. Howl! The Secluded Night Dark King screamed, but his body only swayed slightly before stabilizing himself. Tang Huan's face slightly paled, and with a slight thought, another ball of 5 colors odor shot out from between his brows like lightning, transforming into a rainbow-colored storm that surged forward. Previous chapter. Next chapter. Boom! An instant later, from within the head of the Secluded Night Dark King, another explosive sound rang, but Tang Huan did not stop for the 3rd time. Howl! The Secluded Night Dark King screamed as his body staggered backwards. However, not long after, it was able to stabilize its body once again. Tang Huan was stunned. The strength of the soul of the Secluded Night Dark King had actually far exceeded his expectations. In a split second, he let out a low growl, and the 5-colored storm roared for the 4th time. In the blink of an eye, it had already been sucked into Secluded Night Dark King's head, completely annihilating that group of blood red odor which had shrunk to a size several times smaller than normal. Woo you you you! Secluded Night Dark King whined and knelt on the ground, the 2 ribs in his hands barely supporting his upper body. In his head, there was actually still a fist-sized ball of blood red odor left. Goo! Amidst the roar akin to that of Lei Ming, Zhao actually leapt up once more, and his body turned into a small ball of white flowing shadows as he explosively shot forward. In a split second, its 2 hind legs already landed on Secluded Night Dark King's back. With a boom, the little white rabbit bounced back dozens of meters. When it landed, its 4 limbs gave way and its body fell limply onto the ground. There was no longer any movement. Its pair of bright red eyes also closed. Bam! The Secluded Night Dark King's burly body uncontrollably flew out like a broken kite, heavily smashing onto the ground. The 2 ribs in his hands that were full of cracks completely exploded, turning into countless pieces, and its body also crumbled into pieces. The blood red aura on its bones quickly faded, becoming as black as ink once again. Zhai! Tang Huan cried out in alarm. The little fellow had almost used up all the energy in its body, yet it was still trying to launch another attack. He really wanted to go over and see Zhai's situation, but he couldn't move a muscle. At that time, Demon Lord Fentian had only used soul-killing storm 3 times and his soul had already collapsed. But he had consecutively executed it 4 times. Although his soul was stronger than the Demon Lord Fentian's at that time, after using soul-killing storm 4 times, his face was completely pale, and even his head seemed to be about to split open. Tang Huan, this king will not forgive you. A weak voice came out, and Secluded Night Dark King's head, which was separated from his body, actually floated up. Go! Tang Huan fiercely gritted his teeth as the conqueror's spear turned into a Atramotinous Dragon King and pounced out. Seeing that Atramotinous Dragon King had swallowed the lump of blood red odor in secluded Night Dark King's head, Tang Huan could no longer hold on. He fell back onto the ground and smashed his body straight into it. Tang Huan forced himself not to faint. With a thought, the flying shuttle flew out from his embrace and quickly expanded in the air. Amidst intense trembling sounds, Feng Ming and Zhao Budian's figures seemed to be revealed at almost the same time. Tang Huan felt as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders, but he could no longer hold on and slowly closed his eyes. Chapter 677, Ling Zhao Arch appears. Is there any news about that brat Tang Huan? Shan Lan, what's the situation? Glory Continent. In the courtyard behind Furious Waves City's blacksmith shop, seeing Shan Lan enter, Uzi and the old fatty both jumped up at the same time, their expressions anxious. Shan Lan did not say anything, he only smiled bitterly and shook his head. Uzi and the old fatty looked at each other, feeling helpless. After Tang Huan left the Furious Waves City, the last time he showed his face was when he was in Holy Spirit Continent. According to the news he received, Tang Huan obtained a new set of space aircraft from the Demon Area Desert, so he gave the original one to Xing Meng. After that, Tang Huan had never appeared again. Where did this brat run off to? After a long while, Uzi frowned and sighed. With Tang Huan's strength, there were almost none in the small world that could threaten him right now. Furthermore, Tang Huan had a higher quality space aircraft. Even if he met one or two stronger hidden experts, he could escape if he could not defeat them. Even though he said that, there was still no news of him, so it was hard to not be worried. Shan Lan's lips slightly moved, but just as she was about to speak, her expression suddenly changed as she looked to the east in the blink of an eye. At practically the same time, Uzi and the old fatty had the same reaction. Just now, they suddenly felt an extremely terrifying aura. That aura seemed to have come from a faraway horizon, boundless and majestic like a vast ocean. It was as if there was no obstacle that could stop this terrifying fluctuation. When it brushed past them, even if it was a peak stage 9 ranker like Uzi, the old fatty and Shan Lan, they all felt their hearts shaking, unable to resist at all. The Ling Zhao Arch has appeared. After a while, Uzi was the first to regain his senses. He took a deep breath and looked at the old fatty and Shan Lan as if they had just woken up from a dream. His expression was complicated. They were extremely familiar with this terrifying aura. Every 10 years, this aura would spread out from the Foggy Sea Island and cover every corner of this small world. Ordinary people would not be able to discover this chi, but Stage 9 warriors could clearly feel its existence. The appearance of this aura meant that Ling Zhao Arch had also appeared. When the Ling Zhao Arch was revealed, the Ling Zhao Ancient Road opened as well. Since ancient times, many Stage 9 rankers from the Human Clan, Tian Clan and others had entered the Ling Zhao Ancient Road, hoping to reach the Forging God Great World, but there were only a few that succeeded. The vast majority of them threw their lives there. But even so, it still made many rankers yearn for it. Since the Ling Zhao Arch has appeared, that kid will definitely rush over as well. The old fatty suddenly said with a smile. Right, we will go to the Foggy Sea Island right now. Great Tang Empire, God Down City. Deep inside the palace, Tang Moyang's eyes slightly narrowed as he quietly sensed the waves of terrifying aura that were whizzing towards him. His brows slightly twitched, showing that his heart was extremely restless. Ling Zhao Arch, oh Ling Zhao Arch. After a long while, Tang Moyang sighed. He slowly opened his eyes, and his gaze suddenly became resolute. He had wanted to go and try out the Ling Zhao Arch for a long time. Now that Tang Zhao had become a strong Stage 9 ranker and still possessed a divine armament that he had spent a huge sum of money to forge, he could finally rest in peace. In a blink of an eye, Tang Moyang had already shot up. Holy Spirit Continent, Cloud Sky City. This is, inside the quiet Heavenly Heart Hall. Hai Yan, who was seated cross-legged on the ground, suddenly opened his eyes, a strange expression flashing across his eyes. Has the Lingzhou Arch appeared again? Not far away, on a recliner made from vines, Xingmeng's eyelashes suddenly trembled, then her eyes opened up, revealing a pair of eyes that contained an endless amount of vicissitudes of life. She actually woke up from her slumber, and her gentle voice broke the silence in this space. "Lord, you're awake?" Hai Yan was stunned at first, but soon after, she exclaimed in surprise. Originally, Xingmeng thought that it would take a very long time before she would wake up, and might even be unable to wake up forever. After all, Xingmeng's age was right there, but she didn't expect that she would actually be awoken by the Lingzhou Arch's aura this time. "Lord!" Another joyous cry rang out, and it was Mu Qing's figure that appeared at the entrance of the Heavenly Heart Hall. Tranquil continent, snowy mountain-splitting land. On the cliff formed by ice and snow, a black shadow suddenly appeared. It was tall and slim, with a convexity that made it even more beautiful. She was Shan Shan. "The Lingzhou Arch has appeared. If I didn't go over, that bastard Tang Huan wouldn't have been waiting for me there, right?" Shan Shan frowned. She didn't know what Shan Shan was thinking, but that tender and fair face of hers suddenly blushed, looking extremely alluring. Whoosh! After a moment, Shan Shan was like an arrow that had left the bow, flying swiftly through the vast snowy region. A kilometer above his head, two red figures followed. At the edge of the turbid sea area, in the middle of an exceptionally vast island, flames were blazing high up into the sky. Molten lava were constantly spewing out of the volcanic crater at the center of the island, and a scorching heat spread across the entire island. Not far from the volcano, Yu Yun suddenly shot into the air. Her red skirt fluttered, and a strange light flashed deep within her beautiful eyes. "Little girl, it's time for us to return." The sound of laughter came from far away and near. In a flash, a figure rapidly approached from the edge of the island. It was a blue-robed elder with white hair and a beard. He was tall and had a ruddy complexion. Behind the green-robed old man, a huge black bird was also waving its two thick claws as it followed closely behind at an astonishing speed. "Grandfather, is that the Lingzhou Arch?" "That's right." Not long after, the huge black bird spread its enormous wings and soared into the sky. Two figures sat on its back. In a short span of time, that incomparably strong wave of energy had already spread to every corner of the four continents, including Glory, Origin, Holy Spirit, and Terminator. It even went deep into the region at the edge of the turbid sea area, and wave after wave like a tide, as if it would never stop. At this moment, the boundless clouds and mist above Foggy Sea Island had already disappeared without a trace, and eerie white bones could be seen everywhere. As for those skeletons, after they lost the cover of the mist, they seemed to have lost all of their spirituality. They laid on the ground without moving at all. In the center of the island, the enormous stone arch and the surrounding huge stone pillars all seemed to have turned into living beings. The surface of the island was shining with sparkling lights, and even the huge stone slab on the ground seemed to have been given life, appearing exceptionally agile. Chapter 678. Not us, but me. Not far from the arch door, Tang Huan and Feng Ming stood there motionlessly, their eyes filled with unconcealable astonishment. By the side, Zhao Budian and Zhao Ai had also opened their eyes wide. Back then, after he urged the Conqueror Spear's artifact spirit to swallow the last of the secluded Night Dark King's soul, then called out Feng Ming and Zhao Budian, Tang Huan had completely fainted. The spirit dragon sacred marrow within Zhao Budian's golden horn caused him to wake up very quickly. Adding to the fact that Tang Huan possessed the sun spirit body, the injuries on his flesh body were quickly healed. However, the serious injuries that Tang Huan had sustained from using the soul-killing storm several times in a row were not easy to recover from. After that, Tang Huan did not leave the Foggy Sea Island, but stayed here to cultivate and treat his injuries. This place was indeed a holy land for cultivation. After a period of time, not only had the little white rabbit's strength greatly increased, Feng Ming had also finally stepped past the last half step and become a real heavenly domain level expert. Compared to the time he had fought against the secluded Night Dark King, Tang Huan's strength had clearly risen as well. It was only because the recovery of his soul was rather slow that Tang Huan's soul could be considered to have completely recovered not long ago. But just as Tang Huan was preparing to leave, a huge change suddenly occurred in the Foggy Sea Island. The 81 stone pillars seemed to have turned into 81 whirlpools as they continuously sucked in the surrounding mist. It would probably only take a day or two before all the mist in Foggy Sea Island was devoured, revealing the true appearance of the island covered in mist for the next 10 years. The strangest thing was that after the fog disappeared, the skeletons on the island were all devoured by the fog, turning into lifeless skeletons. And after absorbing all the mist and all the skeleton souls, this small region seemed to have awakened from its slumber, and began to constantly emit terrifying undulations of aura in all directions. Everything that had happened here completely verified Tang Huan's previous judgment. The massive amount of fog in the Foggy Sea Island was indeed there to incite the Lingzhou Arch. As for the souls of the skeletons, they had become the artifact spirit of the Lingzhou Arch after they were absorbed and gathered together. Standing here, Tang Huan could clearly feel the boundless spirituality. During his stay in the Foggy Sea Island, Tang Huan had searched through the memories of Gui Jia and the secluded Night Dark King's souls and gained a deeper understanding of the island. Before this, Tang Huan was very much in the future. But why have he not seen these skeletons from other places in this little world for countless of years? But now, Tang Huan knew that for all the skeletons here, this Foggy Sea Island was equivalent to a huge cage. The clouds and mist on the island allowed the skeletons to possess great strength. However, once they left the island, the souls of the skeletons would leave the corpses and return to the Lingzhou Arch. The Lingzhou Arch and the skeleton on the island were one. Every 10 years, the Lingzhou Arch would absorb the fog and open up the Lingzhou Ancient Road. After the skeleton and soul merge, they would become the spirit of the Lingzhou Arch. In 3 months, when the Lingzhou Arch closes his eyes, the fog that contained a boundless amount of power will be reborn, and the gathered souls will separate and return to their respective bodies. However, after this event, the souls of all the skeletons would become extremely weak. In the following time, the mist in the island grew more and more numerous. The skeletons absorbed the energy within the mist, and their souls gradually grew stronger. After about 10 years, the skeleton's soul had almost completely recovered. Then, along with the mist, it was once again absorbed. A new cycle began. The Lingzhou Arch continued to open and close, and the skeletons continued to experience this rebirth. After every rebirth, their previous memories would disappear. A few hundred years ago, a powerful skeleton was lucky enough to merge with a treasure that was left behind countless years ago, lucky enough to leave behind memories, unwilling to continue experiencing this endless cycle and trying to find ways to avoid the cycle of reincarnation. Thus, the secluded Night Divine Palace appeared, and that skeleton was the secluded Night Dark King, a stage 9 ranker who had trespassed into the Foggy Sea Island to train, under the control of the secluded Night Dark King when he was exhausted, became the first Hall Master of the secluded Night Divine Palace. The main purpose of the secluded Night Divine Palace's existence was to earn money and then purchase all kinds of precious herbs and artifacts for the secluded Night Dark King to temper its flesh body. As time passed, secluded Night Divine Palace changed to another 5 palace masters. Although secluded Night Dark King was still undergoing reincarnation, its body was growing stronger and stronger. With a strong body and complete memories, the degree of weakening of its soul became smaller and smaller, and its strength recovered faster and faster. Inside the white skeleton's palace, the white bead inside the skeleton's head was the thing that the secluded Night Dark King was preparing to use to hold its soul. Secluded Night Dark King had originally planned to divide his own soul into 2 after his strength had risen to the peak of heavenly domain. The first part was to stay in the skeleton's body to respond to Lingzhou Arch's sucking, and the second part was to transfer to the white bead, then find a stage 9 ranker to possess it. secluded night Dark King's method had an extremely high success rate. But unfortunately, before they could even take action, Tang Huan had first eliminated Gui Jia and his embodiment, and then eliminated the secluded night Dark King himself. As of now, all of their remaining residual soul had already been completely refined by Tang Huan, and was absorbed by the 8 Remoteness Dragon King. A large amount of souls had greatly increased the spirit of the Conqueror's spear. Its strength was no longer inferior to the spirit of the Xuan Yuan sword, it was now the spirit of the heavenly domain. Tang Huan, when do you plan to enter Lingzhou Ancient Road? Feng Ming's voice suddenly sounded out, breaking the silence of this entire space. Right now, the news of the appearance of the Lingzhou Arch has probably spread throughout the entire small world. The strength of that wave of aura that originated from the Lingzhou Arch had already far surpassed Tang Huan's understanding. This kind of wave was definitely able to spread to every corner of the small world. Shan Shan and the sword should be arriving here very soon, as well as Master and the old fatty. It will not be too late to enter after they arrive, since this Lingzhou Arch will only be closed for another 3 months. Alright, then we'll go back in a few days. Feng Ming was eager to give it a try. Not us, but me. Hearing this, Tang Huan couldn't help but laugh. Huh? Feng Ming was startled. According to what Jian Yi said, once I enter the Lingzhou Ancient Road, the test will begin. Tang Huan said with a smile, if I am able to pass the test, I will be able to pass through the Lingzhou Ancient Road, and the Lingzhou Ancient Road will forever exist in the Foggy Sea Island from now on. At that time, you, Shan Shan, my master and the others can directly enter the Forging God Great World from the Lingzhou Ancient Road, and there will be no need for you to take the risk like the others. If I am unable to pass this test, I will definitely lose my life. If you still want to go to Forging God Great World, then it will not be too late for you to enter there. Of course, it would be best if you wait 10 or 20 more years. Hearing this, Feng Ming frowned and fell silent. Chapter 679, Divine Weapon Pavilion Master. Ho! In the evening, a small boat rode the wind and broke the waves as it approached the vast sea. At the bow of the ship was a slim and graceful young woman. Her black robes fluttered in the sea breeze, revealing her curvaceous figure. In the dark sky, there seemed to be 2 small red figures following them. In a short while, the small boat had landed on the Foggy Sea Island. The black-clothed lady leaped up and floated down to the ground. Her figure was like lightning as she rushed towards the center of the island at a fast speed. Thousands of kilometers passed in the blink of an eye. Not long after, the incredibly large Lingzhou Arch was imprinted into his eyes, and a dazzling white luster blossomed, reflecting the gradually deepening night sky and making it completely translucent. Is that bastard here yet? The girl in black paused and murmured to herself. Then, she moved again as fast as lightning. Very quickly, the bright area at the center of the Foggy Sea Island clearly appeared in his line of sight. 2 figures were already quietly standing in front of the Lingzhou Arch. One of them was a young man around the age of 20. He was tall and dressed in black, and his face was as handsome as jade. The other was a young woman. Not only was her clothes red like fire, her eyes were also fiery red. Her facial features were exquisite, her face was gorgeous, and her figure was seductive. Tang Huan. The girl in black subconsciously stopped and exclaimed with a complicated expression. Just as she finished speaking, Tang Huan suddenly disappeared from Lingzhou Arch, and in the next moment, he reappeared in front of her. Just as she was about to speak, she felt Tang Huan holding her waist, and the words that she was about to say turned into a soft cry. Shan Shan, you're finally here. Tang Huan laughed loudly. You put me down. Shan Shan was a little embarrassed and angry. A captivating red surfaced on her face. Unlike back in the Glory Sacred Temple, there was only Tang Huan and her here. TSK. What a lecherous concubine. At this moment, a teasing voice came from afar. Tang Huan could not help but put Shan Shan down and look up. Under the dim sky, a huge black bird flew over and on its back sat a red figure. Yufian. Shan Shan clenched her teeth. Her face sunk. When it was only 20 or 30 meters away from the ground, The red figure directly leaped down. It was actually a woman in red with a halberd on her shoulder, with a oval face, phoenix eyes, and long hair tied into a ponytail. She had a unique charm to her. Senior apprentice Sister Fian, how have you been? Tang Huan cupped his hands and smiled, but then the corner of his mouth uncontrollably twitched. A piece of skin and flesh on his waist was fiercely pinched by Shan Shan. Yu Fian's two eyes wandered around Tang Huan and Shan Shan as he chuckled, but before she could make a sound, another vigorous voice sounded out, "Girl, this is Tang Huan." Although the voice was not loud, it was still exceptionally clear. Tang Huan followed the voice and looked over, to see that under the faint shadow of the night in the north, there was an additional burly figure. In an instant, he had already passed through two of the Peng Shao pillars, and was actually a silky white-haired old man in green robes with a long beard, with long sleeves floating in the wind. It looked like he had walked down the path of the heavens. "Grandpa Yu," Shan Shan suddenly called out, although she did not like Yu Fian's looks. When she saw the green-robed elder that suddenly appeared, her face revealed a happy smile. Tang Huan also smiled slightly. He already understood the identity of the green-robed elder. He is the Divine Weapon Pavilion Master. As the days passed, more and more Stage 9 rankers arrived at the Foggy Sea Island from various places, and the number of people gathered at the center of the island also gradually increased. Xing Meng, Mu King, Shen Guan, Wu Zi, Yi Changshan, Shan Lan. Only then did Tang Huan realize that the number of Stage 9 rankers in the human clan was actually more than what he had expected. Currently, there were dozens of rankers from the two clans gathered in front of the Lingzhou Arch, and about 70% of them were human clan rankers. Of course, most of them were normal rankers of the Stage 9. In the end, there were only a few who had reached the peak Stage 9 level. "Senior Jian Yi, we should depart now." Another evening, Tang Huan suddenly looked to the side and laughed. Hearing Tang Huan's words, all the surrounding experts were stunned. The direction that Tang Huan was looking in was empty. He could not even see a single person. A few meters to the left of Tang Huan, a thin old man in a white robe appeared. The qi that leaked out from his body made everyone even more shocked. Everyone already knew the origins of this Lingzhou Arch and Lingzhou Ancient Road from Tang Huan, and also knew of Yunzan's existence. They also knew that Mazi Sword Valley was a test set by the sword seal Yunzan left behind. After Tang Huan passes the sword seal test, the moment he enters Lingzhou Ancient Road, the test Yunzan had left behind will immediately begin. This time, if Tang Huan could also successfully pass through, for this small world, the effects would be something that no expert in the past could compare to. The moment they saw the white-robed old man, everyone guessed that he was the one formed from the sword seal, Jian Yi. From the looks of the sword blade's expression, it was obvious that he had already arrived at this place. If not for Tang Huan's shout, even if a few more days passed, no one would have discovered his existence. "Junior brother Tang Huan, be careful." Yu Fian could not resist asking. At this moment, although the halberd was still on her shoulders, but her body had already merged with the Divine Armaments square Aurora halberd that Tang Huan had given her. "Tang Huan, you must survive." Shan Shan could no longer care about it. There was a thick sense of worry between his brows. "Little Tang, you will definitely be able to do it." "Little brother, take care." Goo. Everyone spoke up. Some were worried, some were expectant, and all of them had different expressions on their faces. Tang Huan looked deeply at Shan Shan, Uzi and the others. He then took a deep breath and nodded towards the sword, then turned and walked towards Lingzhou Arch, with big steps. On Tang Huan's shoulder, Zhao Budian grabbed Tang Huan's hair with one claw, while he continuously waved at everyone with the other paw. According to what Jian Yi had said, during the trials that Tang Huan had to undergo, any expert of Stage 9S and above could not be helped. Even if they were to enter the space aircraft, they would still be rejected by the Lingzhou Arch. Otherwise, Tang Huan would have no choice but to leave Zhao Budian outside as a companion. After a moment, the air of Lingzhou Arch fluctuated, and Tang Huan and Jian Yi's figures disappeared at almost the same time. Chapter 680, Ancient Path. Gu. The little white rabbit growled again, and its red eyes were filled with reluctance. Tang Moyang squinted his eyes and looked at the extremely huge Lingzhou arch, and could not help but mutter, "Everyone, do you think that little brother Tang Huan will succeed?" "Of course," Uzi and the old fatty said resolutely at almost the same time. When the surrounding people heard this, they could not help but nod in agreement. There were dozens of rankers here, and none of them didn't want to see Tang Huan pass the test. If Tang Huan succeeded, they could also easily enter the Forging God Great World from this small world. If Tang Huan failed. In order to enter the Forging God Great World, everyone had to rely on their own strength to pass through the Lingzhou Ancient Road. After seeing everyone's optimistic expressions, Feng Ming raised his hand to rub Zhao Ai's head and sighed in his heart. She had a feeling that Tang Huan would not be able to succeed that easily this time, and the greatest threat he would face would probably not be the test Yunzan left inside the Lingzhou Ancient Road. The Lingzhou Ancient Road was actually just a path. The path that was paved with large pieces of old and wide slabs of limestone extended forward far into the distance. There was no end in sight, while the clouds and mist on both sides of the road churned unceasingly. "This is the Lingzhou Ancient Road," Tang Huan muttered as he looked back. Behind him was also an ethereal cloud, and the place he was standing on was the first blue stone on the road. Here, the incomparably strong perception ability did not have any use, and he could not feel the situation within the cloud at all. After that, Tang Huan subconsciously stretched out his arm. The moment his 5 fingers touched the clouds, an incomparably terrifying power surged out and flicked his fingers away. "Yeah?" Seeing that, Zhao Budian's eyes widened and emitted out in surprise. Tang Huan was also slightly shocked in his heart. Although he was severely injured while fighting with the secluded Night Dark King, after his injuries healed, his strength had not decreased but instead increased. But even so, with his current strength, he was completely unable to resist the power that surged out from the clouds. However, Tang Huan had already collected himself and asked slowly, "Senior Jian Yi, where is the test?" "The test has begun," a vigorous voice rang out, but it was faintly discernible, sometimes forward, sometimes left, sometimes right. It was unknown where it came from. This was naturally the sound of Jian Yi's voice. Sword 1 was the Lingzhou Arch that Tang Huan had passed through at the same time, but when Tang Huan stepped into the Lingzhou Ancient Road, he disappeared, as if he had merged with the ancient path. "Has it already begun?" Tang Huan frowned. He suddenly became alert, and in between the mind instructs, in a second, a dark red light flashed, and the Conqueror's spear appeared in his hand. Lifting his eyes and looking forward, Tang Huan calmed down and slowly walked forward. In the instant that the sole of his foot touched the ground, the scene in front of Tang Huan's eyes changed greatly. Even Zhao Budian, who was squatting on his shoulder, was no longer there. Instead, he had replaced him with the extremely familiar blacksmith shop in the Furious Waves city. Tang Huan had actually returned to the day when he was reborn in this world. In the smithy, Tang Huan put down the 3 long blades that he prepared to exchange them for gold and frowned, a look of confusion in his eyes. He realized that he seemed to have forgotten many things, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what he had forgotten. The sound of chaotic footsteps got closer and closer, causing Tang Huan to wake up. He looked over and saw 3 youths with swords hanging around their waists. Tang Huan immediately recognized them. They were Tang family, and were called Tang Hong, Tang Zhong and Tang Junji respectively. They had contributed greatly to Tang Huan being able to come back to life in this world. After a few sentences, Tang Hong was completely enraged. He sneered, and then smashed his right hand onto Tang Huan's shoulder. Tang Huan snorted. He did not move his body at all, and with a punch filled with power, he punched towards Tang Hong's abdomen. But after a short moment, Tang Huan's face changed. He discovered that there was a sharp dagger in Tang Hong's left hand, which clashed with his fist and fiercely stabbed towards his lower abdomen. With this punch, he was sure that he could send Tang Hong flying, but Tang Hong's dagger could still bore a hole in his abdomen. Retreat. Tang Huan didn't have any hesitation as he quickly retreated, but very quickly, Tang Huan groaned in pain. He reacted very quickly indeed, but he forgot that his shoulder was still being held down by Tang Hong's right hand. After a slight delay, the sharp dagger had pierced through his clothes and opened a wound on his abdomen. Roar! Tang Huan roared like an injured beast. His left hand firmly grabbed the front of the dagger. A tearing pain came forth, causing Tang Huan to faint. He felt as though all 5 of his fingers were cut off by a dagger, fresh blood oozing out, flowing through the gaps of his fingers and dripping down. Tang Hong opened his mouth wide in shock, obviously not expecting Tang Huan to use such a method to block it. However, before he could come to his senses, a pang sound rang out. Tang Huan's right fist hooked upwards, striking Tang Hong's chin. In the next moment, Tang Hong flew out like a kite with its string cut, and landed heavily on the ground. Before he could crawl back up, Tang Huan was like a wild beast that had just escaped from its cage. He rushed to Tang Hong's front with large strides, and his huge fist fiercely smashed into the bridge of his nose. Bang! Bang! Tang Huan showed no mercy. He punched after punch. A moment later, Tang Hong's head tilted and he completely fainted. Tang Huan spat out. He fiercely looked at the dumbstruck Tang Zhong and Tang Junji. But just as Tang Huan was prepared to teach them a lesson, the scene in front of his eyes suddenly changed. Tang Zhong, Tang Junji, and even Tang Hong, who was lying on the ground, and even the blacksmith shop, were all gone. Appearing in front of Tang Huan were still surging clouds and blocks of stone tablets. Tang Huan blinked his eyes a few times, completely stunned. Thinking back to the scene from before, Tang Huan was so shocked that he broke out in cold sweat. What he revealed should only be illusions, but it was too realistic. It was as if he had returned to the day he was reborn, and all his memories for the next few years had disappeared. That day, Tang Huan did indeed fight with Tang Hong, and in the end, Tang Huan won. But in the illusion, the situation was completely different. Tang Hong seemed to have already known that Tang Huan would punch his abdomen, and even prepared a dagger beforehand. If it were not for Tang Huan's prompt decision to endure the pain and grab onto the dagger, his intestines would have been destroyed and he would have lost his life. If he died in the illusion, did that mean that the test was over?